Okay, we're going to begin. My name is Lori Burgess. I'm from Cornerstone University, and I want to welcome everyone. It's good to see many of you. We'll probably have a few more people join, but I thought we'd get started. And someone mentioned this would be the time that we'd normally be getting our coffee. I do have my coffee. So anyway, good to see everyone. Thought I would start by giving you just a couple updates or just how we're gonna go through the day. This is our first official virtual meeting, and it's good to be together. We missed our meeting in the spring, and so it's nice that we can at least connect this way. Today, our agenda, hopefully you were able to see it when I sent it through email, but it's very similar, if not the same as when we're meeting in person. So obviously this will look different and it may flow a little differently. I'll try to facilitate and move our meeting along. But in terms of the times that we have, I'm not quite sure that we'll need as much time per section, but in the afternoon, we'll definitely start again at 12:15. So if for some reason we end early, we'll just plan to begin again at 12:15, but I'll lead us through the sections on the agenda. I want to just say a couple thank yous. One, I want to thank Mike McDonald for his work as chair, and there's a lot of work that goes into planning and preparing for these meetings, and so I've really appreciated being able to work with Mike in this past year, and now he'll be stepping down as chair. But Mike, thank you for what you've done for DARTEP and the ways that you've led our time last year and then helping me transition this year. Really appreciate that. I also want to say thank you to Brian Philippak and Beth Fighton for helping with the planning. Sean Koke from MDE, thank you to you as well for helping make this happen, and the meetings, and Brian's helped with the technology and getting us set up. So it's shout out to him, and thank you for the extra work that you've been putting in. Just a couple reminders, if you could keep your mute on unless you're speaking. Also want to highlight the afternoon sessions. Very excited about having the Michigan Social Emotional Learning Alliance join us, and also another core practice focus on building respectful relationships. That'll be led by Sean Lancaster. So anyway, it'll be a good day, some good things to look forward to. MDE will be sharing with us this morning, actually. So that's what our day will look like. Why don't we go ahead and move on to organizational reports, and I'm gonna pass it along to Beth, who is our treasurer for DARTEP.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Brian, are we able to start the slide deck? I guess I'm not positive who's running it. You are fabulous. Thank you. So I first want to thank everybody who has already filled out the membership form and has sent in their dues. I really appreciate that. If you are not sure if your institution is paid or who is on your list, you're welcome to send me a GChat on the side to my email address, and I can check for you. But I just really have one slide with a lot of information on it. So Brian, if you'll go to our next slide, the last time we met was in February, and you can see our balance. I decided not to give you a month-by-month accounting of where we've been, but as of the end of September, we had about 15 institutions that have paid dues for this year. and that total was $3,150. As a reminder, it's $50 per member, and that is for the entire year. If you know that you're going to have some people in and out and you aren't really sure if you should have a bunch of different members, you're welcome to just say member 1, member 2, and then rotate people in as necessary. Last year, we did receive a check from Go React. They were going to host one of our lunch sessions for us and do a presentation. And I was not able to get into my office and find the checkbook to pay them back yet. And so DARTEP is still talking about, do we want them to host in the future? But I may need to return that money to them. Additionally, we are going to be presenting a $300 honorarium today. And I'll let another person announce what that is for. And so our ending balance for September 30th was $5,959.41. My contact information is on the next slide. So if any of you need to get a hold of me, you are welcome to reach out. My office phone number is there. And I will throw my email address in the chat for you so that you have that as well. And that concludes the treasurer's report.
Thank you, Beth. Appreciate that. Thank you again for your work. We will now move on to our organizational reports. And we have MACD up first, and that's the Michigan Association of Colleges of Teacher Education. And Sally Ray, are you available? Would you be willing to share if you have anything to share?
So actually, I'm the president now.
I was going to say that's Beth Kubitsky now.
So thank
Thanks,
you,
Lorraine.
Sally Ray, for your service. We really appreciate it. And so MACD, we're also going to be moving our meetings to virtual meetings this year and taking this opportunity to really look at some of our bylaws, but also to support each other. And so one of the things that we're hoping to do is we'll be sending out emails with the dates for the fall meeting. Right now, October 16th is what we were thinking about, and we'll be emailing out the bylaws and having conversations about that. It's more of a kind of a business meeting and only having it for a reasonable Zoom time. So, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then done, so that we don't die from Zoom. The exciting news that we want to share with people this year is we are still going to keep track of our membership, but we are waiving dues this year since we won't be meeting face to face, and there won't be the dues. But I will be sending out what would the dues structure would look like, only because this might be a chance for institutions that previously hadn't participated in MACD to consider dipping your toe in the water. And I don't want you to dip your toe in the water and then say, we love this, and not have an idea of how much it costs. And it isn't that expensive. So we're excited, and that's about all I have to say, unless Sally has something she wants to add.
Nope, that was perfect, Beth. MACD is in good hands with Beth Kubitsky in charge this year.
All right, very good.
Sorry, I didn't turn on my video. I didn't mean to be secret. So bye.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Sally, as well. All right, let's move on to Michigan Association Teacher Educators. Is there anyone that is willing to share or has anything to share for Mate?
Hey, good morning. It's this is Ray Francis. Yeah, I can share, and I'll post this in things in just a little bit too. But just by way of update, we had 19 Michigan ATE members attend the ATE National Conference in February 2020 before everything shut down, so to speak. We currently have a membership of about 128 individuals. Our membership remains free, and if you would like to join, send me a note at franc1rw@cmich.edu. I will post that into the chat when I can in a bit. We are most likely deferring our Student Teacher of the Year program until fall 2021, so please stay tuned. We do plan to have a spring meeting conference soon as we figure out exactly what parameters and things. Our next group meeting, though, will be virtual. And for those of you that are interested, either for yourselves, for colleagues, for graduate students, for teachers and clinicians that you may know, our Michigan ATE journal, Perspectives on Critical Issues in Education. The most recent issue was published in May 2020, and our next issue will be in 2021 March, following our spring conference. If you want more information about it, I'll post it in the chat after a bit, or you can go to michiganate.org and navigate your way to publications and submission guidelines. That's it for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate that. Okay, let's move on to the Michigan Public Deans Council.
Do we have Joe Lubig on the call? Okay, hearing no Joe, I'll stop taking minutes. That's what I'm furiously trying to do on another screen. And I will speak on behalf of this organization and pull up our minute meetings from September 11th. My name is Mike McDonald, and I am the chair-elect for the Michigan Public Education Deans. Joe Lubig is the chair for this current year. And I'm just going to scroll down the minutes from last meeting. The goals for the prior year for the Michigan Public Education Deans were to work with other groups to strengthen definitions and communications, which I think by virtue of me sharing this is hopefully contributing. Legislative and government MDE collaboration, professional development for the Dean's Group, advocating for teacher education in Michigan, and working on issues of social justice. We revisited those goals and determined that we made progress on some, but in particular, the goal about addressing issues of social justice became more of a concern and an ongoing point that we wanted to continue on as a major goal for this year. So to that end, we are endeavoring at our next meeting, and we meet 4 times a year, to consider how we can work with an organization in Pawpaw schools to look at Indigenous or First Nations issues and concerns, and invite that particular group in to help us work through some social justice issues in First Nations communities in particular, and social justice in general. The election of new officers included outgoing chair Bob Floden, President Bob Floden, and chair-elect Joe Lubig. Now Joe becomes president. I'm president-elect. Secretaries Paula Lancaster of Central Michigan University, and legislative liaisons are Mike Saylor from Eastern and Bob Barnett from University of Michigan Flint. So with that, the virtual gavel was passed. Other than that, at that meeting, we met with the MDE and discussed grade band updates, teacher cadet programming. We looked at flexible hours for clinical experiences and social justice concerns relative to students being asked to contribute to tutoring efforts that may offset the experiences in public schools. Some of those themes will be touched upon by the MDE today. We also looked at further to the issue of students working in schools. We looked at legislative updates, which again will be touched upon today. And we had a meeting with Dan Hurley from the Michigan Association for State Universities, where he talked about the state budget, and he talked about K-12 funding and CARES Act implications. So if anyone does have a particular concern on any of those and wants further information, I'm happy to respond to an email or a phone call. So I think that's it, Lori. Now I just have to type up what I just said. That's the problem.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate that. Let's move on to MyPie. That's the Michigan Independent Educator Preparation Institutions. Susan, are you available to share?
Yes, I am here. Good morning. So Laurie and I worked together in kind of co-chairing this the last few years. We kind of tag team on this. MyPie, for anyone who is new to DARTEP or to MyPie, is kind of the counterpart to the Michigan Public Deans Council. So of all of the institutional college and university teacher prep programs in Michigan, about half of us are independent and about half are connected to public colleges and universities. So those of us who are independent private institutions, we don't have regular meetings. We've started to, and then COVID hit. We had started meeting in Lansing once in the fall and once in the spring through, drawing a blank, MICU, Michigan Independent Colleges and Universities. They offered their facilities there for us to meet at. Basically, we try to advocate for our teacher prep institutions to stay connected with one another. This spring, when COVID hit, we did a lot of resource sharing and kind of support idea sharing. We met a couple of different times via Zoom meetings. So it's really important that we have your email and that you reach out to Lori or I. We kind of maintain a separate list of emails. It may be the dean or director or chair. It may be multiple people from your organization. We're fine with that. But we do a lot with kind of ad hoc as needed email communications with the group using this master list. So if you want to and are not receiving anything, make sure you let us know. Or if there was a change in your institution over the summer. I know there were some changes that we've been notified of, but do let us know. So I guess the updates, we did have, like I said, some Zoom meetings, and that was very helpful to kind of brainstorm what are we doing about clinical placement, student teaching, apprenticeship, internships, kind of shared some ideas for that. And the other thing that we're looking at doing is exploring AQUEP as an alternative option to CAPE for accreditation. So we've reached out to the Michigan Department of Ed, and we're hoping to get in dialogue a little bit more in the coming year about a second option for accreditation. We don't know if that's feasible or not, but that's something of interest to this group of teacher prep institutions. I think that's it. Lori, anything else that I need to say?
No, thank you for that update and including the MICU information. And we'll move on. The Consortium of Outstanding Achievement in Teaching with Technology does not have a report, so I'm going to move on to Paula Lancaster for Mitten, and she'll introduce what the Michigan Teacher Education Network is and give us a little bit of information about that group.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about Mitten and share a little bit. So we are a group of teacher preparation institutions, representatives from teacher preparation institutions, as well as K-12 partners. So we're a very kind of mixed group of folks who've been together for quite some time. Our primary focus, two focuses actually. One is to attempt to build a professional system of practice. And by that we mean working really hard to connect these different entities across the educational enterprise. And we'd like to do that through a learning network focus, when we're focused primarily on equitable practice within classrooms. So one of our goals, for example, is to focus on the core practices and develop a common language and a common view of what is meant by equitable and just teaching practice by context. So one part of what we're working toward is this building of a professional system of practice. And then another primary focus of our work is to teach teaching in ways that centers the brilliance of each child, to be very, very child-centered and to keep children as the primary centered focus of what we're doing. And so over the course of the coming years, we are scheduling and working toward this learning network, and we're offering facilitated networked learning communities where groups of people can come together. Of course, this will be virtual at the moment. Over time, it might become face-to-face. We'll see what happens there. But for right now, we have some virtual facilitated network learning communities that we will be beginning. Some of those will be focused on equity-centered core practices and how to teach those core practices. Others will be focused more on coaching and mentoring pedagogies and how we might support beginner teachers as they enter into the classroom. We also plan to hold a statewide institute and continue to do advocacy and policy work as well as research. I'm going to add a link in the chat for, if you're interested in joining us, we'd love for you to pop in and explore. And also, I'm happy to answer any questions offline or via email, so do feel free to reach out.
Paula, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you again this afternoon as you present, and appreciate that update. Okay, we will be moving on now to DARTEP business rather, and starting with the approval of the February minutes. And we'll be doing this a little bit differently because we have 115 participants. It would be difficult to do an approval by saying aye. So we are requesting that we instead do a vote of nay, and if you could include that in the chat to everyone, and that will be how we will approve the minutes. So a little different, but we believe that will work for our Zoom meeting. So I will move it along to Mike McDonald so that we can discuss chair-elect. That position is open for this year and would work alongside with the chair, and then next year would become the chair. So Mike, I'm gonna hand it over to you again.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Normally this would have happened at Holland in the spring when we meet, and regrettably the pandemic sidelined everything. And so I have a nomination I'd like to put forward for the chair-elect position, who will serve as the secretary for this year and then take the lead the following. The person I'd like to nominate is Jennifer Clem of Central Michigan University. Jennifer, do you accept that nomination? If it's seconded, just hold on. We need a second.
Beth Kavitsky, second. As does Sally Ray.
Beth and I co-second that.
I'll duly note that in the minutes. Jennifer, do you accept?
I accept.
Woo woo!
Are there other nominations? Well, hearing none, I think you've been thrown under nominated, Jennifer. Those in favor, I don't think have to vote in terms of the chat, but if you have an abstention or a nay, I think Lori's directions suggest that you should type that into the chat box.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Michael.
Can I add one moment of discussion? Just
Absolutely.
as a positive, as a reinforcement.
You
Jennifer
bet.
has done so much work in the past couple of years, and she has been so involved in so many areas around the state. And I think that this is a great nomination, Mike. And Jennifer, I think you're going to do a fantastic job.
Thank you, Sally Ray. Appreciate it.
And
Jennifer.
I think even just as a visual, we could kind of clap.
Then Lori's gonna have to help me with what I have to do.
All right.
I think we all will, because that's how it works. Sally and Beth help me. I help Jennifer. That's the way it works. So we're all here to help you together.
Okay, great.
All right, very good. Michael, will you talk about the honorarium, please?
In years past, there's been an honorarium that we provided to someone who assisted Kevin with the accounting and the books relative to the treasurer's position. We haven't had such an honorarium in recent times since Beth Fighton has taken on that role. And Beth hasn't requested such an honorarium, but her idea, which I fully support and I'll put forward as a motion to hear a second perhaps, is that I propose that we put forward a $300 honorarium for to Brian from Eastern Michigan University, given his tremendous amount of work helping mediate meetings like this, and frankly, running our website and just doing all the things that just makes him such a wonderful person and colleague. So I propose that an honorarium of $300 be directed to Brian Filipiak of Eastern Michigan University.
I second and nominate him for King of the Universe.
Having heard that, if you are in favor, you really don't have to do anything. But if you have an abstention, a concern, or a question, please raise your questions in the chat box or through this medium, because I understand that that you may have a concern about that. But hearing none, we'll take a vote by way of the chat box.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mike. And we are just moving right along on our schedule. Business was supposed to end at 10 and it's 9:30. So it seems that this is a very efficient mode of meeting. Sean from Michigan Department of Education, would you be willing to provide us with your updates, please?
Yes, absolutely. And if we can go back to the slides, we'll get started. All right. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to meet with you. This is the first wearing of a necktie since I believe appearing before the state board in March live. It's a special necktie that my dad got me at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute in a trip that they made there in March, and he gave me a handwritten note that said maybe I'll have an opportunity to display it on Zoom. So I am wearing it today on Zoom. It is an African design that means wisdom. So hopefully that's good karma for today. Several of my colleagues at the department are on the meeting, and you'll hear from some, and others they will lurk and listen, and will be divided up around the job-alike time. Of course, there's me, for those who don't know me, Sean Kotke, manager of the Educator Preparation Unit here at MDE. I have Gina Garner, a consultant in our unit, Darcy McMahon, also a consultant in our unit, Bridget McDowell, our education assessment specialist. Dana Utterback is on the phone. She was having a Zoom login issue. Kate Boswell Gallagher, manager of our data and accountability unit. Krista Reed was to join us. I don't know if she's made it on yet or not. She was having a little Zoom issue also. Our director, Leah Breen. Oh, Krista says I'm here in the chat, so that's fantastic. And Sarah Kate Levan, our assistant director, is also here. I think that accounts for everybody from MDE who registered for the meeting. A couple of things right off the bat. First, we have a robust social media presence, so please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Use these hashtags, hashtag ProudMIEducator or hashtag PME when promoting the work that you're doing, great things that are happening in your school community. And we have our Educationally Speaking newsletter. There's a link in the DARTEP written updates to sign up for that. That comes out once a month and goes to virtually every certified teacher, except those who perhaps have opted out, and has a lot of periodic updates and news. Was especially helpful in keeping us connected to the field during this period of shutdown. If I go to the next slide, please. Give you a round of applause, virtual applause for our 2020-21 Regional Teachers of the Year. Have them all listed here. You'll see their faces throughout. We do want to bring them to DARTEP meetings. We had them join us for a panel last December or February, the previous cohort, and we'd like to make that a regular part of the meeting. They are certainly eager to speak with you. Special spotlight on Region 9 Teacher of the Year, Owen Bondano, who is our Michigan Teacher of the Year. And so he is our State Teacher of the Year. They were all introduced, again, virtually at the August State Board meeting. And we congratulate them and look forward to collaborating with them throughout the year. Okay, I've got some legislative updates for you. Again, this is a curated list of bills is in the DARTEP written update. These are things that were introduced in the 1920 session. We've tried to call out some things that are perhaps different from the April meeting. These three bills were signed into law by the governor. The first one, Michigan Merit Curriculum Bill, removes the sunset on substituting CTE and visual performing arts for part of one's world language credits. And so that had been targeted to sunset within the next 4 years. That now sunset is removed. The dual enrollment bills allow for dual enrollment while school is not in session with the approval of the school and the superintendent of the local school. Previously, dual enrollment could only be done while school was in session, and of course, school was not in session for a significant period. But this allows for dual enrollment to continue when school is not in session. And then the Return to Learn pandemic response bills were passed. Again, it's codifying some of the things in the governor's plan for reopening schools. And there you go. You can go to the legislative site and read all of these things. Those, again, all three have passed both houses and been signed by the governor and are law. Let's go to the next slide, please. These are several newly introduced bills. So most of the previous ones had been around, or a couple of them had been around in April. These are newly introduced since August, or since April. The teacher evaluation ones here, there are several EdEval bills. In fact, there are more that just dropped yesterday in the Senate. And they do multiple things. They either eliminate the student growth component, or they don't eliminate the student growth component. So there's some competing changes in different bills. Some of them eliminate it completely. Some just take out the old language about building up to a 40% piece. But the ones that were dropped yesterday in the Senate eliminate the student growth component of EdEvals. And then some of these bills also then suspend some of the components and requirements of it for probationary teachers and tenured teachers during the 2021 school year. All of these bills are in, I don't think any of them have yet passed one house or another, but they are all in play. We have a teacher loan forgiveness grant bill, which if you take a look at the text, you'll see it's very vague and says the department will come up with all the rules for it. So we'll see how that goes. The Paraprofessional pathway grants bill allows for 2 different pathways for paraprofessionals to get continuing education. One pathway is for those who get an associate's degree, and the other is for paraprofessionals to advance to a bachelor's degree in an education-related field. So should these bills become law, you will have a great recruiting tool here for our paraprofessionals. And it wouldn't stop with those that pick an associate's degree. They would be fantastic to then bring right into your bachelor's degree programs. The bill to create a CTE teacher cadet program and put more around that. A bill for a model cursive curriculum. So it doesn't have a component in it to require teacher education to teach teachers how to teach cursive. However, if you've been reading closely through the PK3 standards, there's that whole section on handwriting. So it would fit well within that. And then the last bill, which is actually the first one listed here, is a bill commemorating universities, requiring them to refund room and board costs during the shutdown during the pandemic. I know that there were some partial refunds that were issued by institutions, and this is sort of going one step further. If I can go to the next slide, please. This is breaking news. This was introduced yesterday. Yesterday, 4 bills in the Senate on dyslexia. You should take very close attention to, or pay very close attention to these bills. They have bipartisan support. They are, the sponsors and co-sponsors are well-placed senators within the House Education Committee. And we're looking at a lame duck session coming up, and things can happen really, really fast in a lame duck session. The first 2 bills are very PK-12 focused. So the first one is about creating a dyslexia resource guide advisory committee within MDE to create this resource set. And there's no hiding that this is about dyslexia. They're very upfront in using that term throughout. The second bill requires all public schools to pre-screen for dyslexia for all children. 1174 is a teacher prep bill that requires there be a curriculum in dyslexia required, that we require that you have this in order for EPIs to be approved. So this is not program approval, this is EPI approval. And if you, it's like, wow, that sounds a lot like those kinds of bills that Garcia put up that said, in order for an EPI to be approved, you must do X, Y, and Z. And you're absolutely right. It does, there's a lot of language, particularly in 1175, that was in the Garcia bill package. This establishes minimum credit and content requirements for reading methods courses. So it sets it at 12 for early elementary, 9 for later elementary, which, you know, hopefully you're targeting that in the new programs, but that it sets that in there. And it takes out the section about doing, that says doing whatever the superintendent tells you to do for reading methods, and lays out a lot of content requirements that should be in your reading methods courses. And that you can't be issued a certificate unless you've achieved all of that starting in 2024. It sunsets the current content requirements on the reading diagnostics course and introduces new ones starting in 2024. So it eliminates all of the things that are in the current reading diagnostics legislation and establishes a new set of requirements that would go into that. Still has it as 3 credits moving toward professional, but then calls out dyslexia. If you recall, when that requirement was originally introduced, it was introduced as an attempt to support teacher knowledge in an awareness of dyslexia and working with students who have dyslexia and being able to identify students with dyslexia. But the word dyslexia was never used in that bill and in the law. And so this sort of reframes it more explicitly in dyslexia. Again, these just dropped yesterday. I had my presentation all set for today, and at 3:30, I got the notice that these things had fallen in, so I added that in quickly, read through the bills, and that is the absolute latest information for you. All right, next slide, please. And then, I mean, obviously, you can send questions to any of us individually through the chat. You can put some in general to the chat. You can hold on till the MDE debrief at the end and ask live, but we're monitoring the chats here so that we can address questions effectively and efficiently throughout the course of the day. As you may be aware, the top 10 in 10 plan was revised and reviewed with a lot of input and now approved. Our new top 10 strategic education plan, which has this nice logo to go with it, has 10 key, or these key areas. So expanding, these are the goals for it. Expanding early childhood learning opportunities, improving early literacy achievement, improving the health, safety, and wellness of all learners, expanding secondary learning opportunities for all students, increasing the percentage of students who graduate from high school, increasing the percentage of adults with a post-secondary credential, increasing the number of certified teachers in areas of shortage, and providing adequate and equitable school funding. With the possible exception of that last bullet, all of these things are things that we strive to do in OEE in building our standards and supporting our institutions in teacher preparation, right? These are a lot of our end goals for our teachers and then their work life. One of the motivations for reframing the top 10 strategic plan was to be able to get better metrics to go with it to measure our progress. And it's good practice and model of continuous improvement that we were already 4 years into the top 10 in plan, and do we need to have a course correction to focus on some other areas. So this set of goals and the metrics provides a tighter focus on key areas of concern and brings out some measurable outcomes for determining our success in the top 10 plan. It also doesn't commit us to getting it done in 10 years, so that understanding some of these things will take quite a bit more time than we have in a 10-year period to do. All right, we can go to the next slide, please. Oh, go back one. It looks like it skipped. There we go. We have some timelines for you on certificate structure implementation. Birth to kindergarten, grades PK3, and then grades 3 through 6. This information was provided in a memo sent out in June, and it was added 2 things. One, adding that, and that's a mistake, a typo on my part. We have the window here in November 2020. There's the window in April 2021, and then it should say 11/30/2021. That's my bad on that. But we added that November 2021 window for institutions to apply for the new programs, or these new grade bands. The new MTTCs will be debuting in late 2021 for the PK3 and the 3-6, and then in early 2022 for the birth to kindergarten. We anticipate first enrollments in new programs to be in fall of 2021. So these programs that are submitted in November of this year, we are targeted to kick off then. And then the final offerings of the old MTTCs, originally we'd had a 2025 date, and it was requested collectively to add a year to that, and we agreed. So the July 2026 will be the last date for the elementary MTTC, the current elementary, the 103. And late in 2026, because we started that test a little bit later and the standards came a little later, the early childhood general and special education test, so the ZS test, would be sunsetted at the end then of 2026, so just a little bit after. Next slide, please. Looking at the next grade band, 5-7 and 7-12, and we're going to give you a good overview of those standards as part of our updates today. English language arts, mathematics, and professional were the standards approved by the State Board of Education in August. And we have 3 application windows for those, starting with November 2021, April 2022, and then November of 2022. We anticipate new MTTCs emerging for each of those areas in 2023. Our evaluation systems now has the standards, and they're building testing frameworks based on those standards. We anticipate first enrollments in these new programs to be fall of 2023. For those that were submitted initially in that first window. Obviously, we'll have rolling starts of first enrollments for those that submit in later windows. And then these are the old MTTCs that will be phased out, and we've put 2029 as the phase out date for these tests. The current tests for English, for language arts, for mathematics elementary, for mathematics secondary, and for the middle level endorsement. And so these are the things that get affected by this set of standards. We're currently, as many of you know, and was in the written update, working with stakeholders on the science standards for teacher preparation in these 2 grade bands. And the social studies will be kicking off in end of October. So end of this month would be the first convening of that. You could imagine that best case scenario for science and social studies would be that these dates, you would just add 1 year to be those, the targets for those 2 content areas. I'm an internal optimist, but I don't necessarily anticipate that we'll have best case scenario like that for both of them. So it could be more of the 18 months or between 1 and 2 to go beyond for those content areas. So next, I'd like to turn it over to Gina with some birth to kindergarten updates. If I can go to the next slide.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. We are rolling on getting the birth to kindergarten grade band implemented. We have had some webinars this summer. We had 3 webinars that really kind of delved into what the application process would be like, what the standards look like, a deep dive into the standards, and then another one that really looked at the clinical experiences for this grade band. And then we also just have some other information. So if you look at your DARTEP update, the links for those webinars are there and you can watch them at your leisure. We also would like to really emphasize and remind you that you have a lot of transfer candidate opportunities with this birth to kindergarten grade band. A large percentage of the candidates that are going to be available for this certification and they're looking for it are probably coming from those 2-year institutions. Also, we have opportunities for candidates who have gotten early credentials as early as high school and then moving into that community college working on that associate's degree. Additionally, people who have teach grants or the Futures for Frontliners, those also direct people into an associate's degree first, and then they need to use a good portion of that associate's degree transferring into that 4-year institution to maintain those grants and scholarships. So what we're asking is that as you're designing your BK programs, please try to make a pathway for these candidates. We know that, you know, the core of your program is for your 4-year candidates, but this particular area, there's a large number of people that are going to be looking for this coming from that 2-year background. And so if you can be thoughtful about designing a pathway to be able to allow that pipeline that we have in place, you're going to be able to open yourself up to more candidates that are available for that. We also are working with Michigan Access, which is the organization for community college faculty who work with early childhood. And so if any of you are interested in connecting with me to join some of those Michigan Access meetings, your 2-year colleagues are the ones who really have those deep infant toddler placements. And we know that that infant toddler piece isn't an option. You do have to have clinical placements within that infant toddler area. So these 2-year partnerships can really, 2-year program partnerships can really help you with determining those quality infant and toddler placements. Thank you. So this is not my slide.
Yes, we, yep, nope, that's good.
Oh, that's
Darcy,
good.
would you
Okay.
like to speak to the slide? Unless you're on mute.
Sorry.
There you go.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. And these, they do also apply to birth to kindergarten, but we're looking at the November submission window, particularly for pre-K 3, 3-6, and birth to kindergarten. And with those submissions, we sent information out about this. If you had given us an intent to offer, an intent to apply for November, that email went to you yesterday, and then a reminder email went to all of DARTEP to make sure that if you thought you sent us an intent to apply but didn't get that information yesterday, to make sure that your intent to apply is sent to us so we know what your plan is for November. There's 2 ways to submit the application in November. You can use the Word application that was sent out in April, plus the supplemental material portion of that was sent in May. Or alternatively, you can use the Qualtrics online application and upload the application matrix to a shared folder. The matrix that we are referring to there is a spreadsheet. If you've been looking at the application, you probably noticed that already. It's a spreadsheet that aligns courses, clinical experiences, core practices, and assessments. And so that's a key piece that we would like to have you submit by upload. And then for April 2021 and beyond, all those submissions will be done with the Qualtrics online application and uploading the matrix. Also, we are planning to have to create and develop an application orientation webinar that will be available by the end of October. So stay tuned for dates and announcements on that. Anything to add there, Gina, that I missed?
No, I think you got it.
All right, yeah, next slide, thanks. Along with that, we really need reviewers. And so we have an intention to have a team of 3 reviewing each of the applications. And that's particularly because we want to have those folks with some grade band specialties or grade area, age range specialties. So we would really appreciate those being submitted to us with early child expertise or middle level expertise, so we can make sure that we give these the best review. We know that capacity right now is stretched beyond what most of us have been able to work through, and we really appreciate that. So just to let you know what those reviewers will need to do, there will be a training in November that'll be about an hour. They'll be asked to review 2 to 3 applications, probably about an hour each, and then participate in some collaboration sessions with other team members about those particular applications, about an hour each. And just a warning that, I don't know, that if you haven't submitted names, we probably will come and ask you and say, please, please give us some names. Next slide, I guess. And Sean, I'll let you direct where we want to go from here.
Yeah, thank you. We want to take some time to really get into these 5-9 and 7-12 grade band standards. So the professional knowledge and skills, the English language arts, and the mathematics. First, each of these sets has some key shifts in them, and these should sound familiar because they are some of the same key shifts that are in the PK3 and the 3-6 standards as compared to the prior sets of standards. One is a focus on contextualized instructional practices instead of a list of content that a teacher would know, or better, even worse, a list of K-12 content that a teacher should know. It really focuses on the instructional practices. So it's not about just know this, know that, know and know how to teach X, Y, and Z. But there are more active teaching verbs throughout the standards. This does not mean that there is no content knowledge embedded into them. And so the goal is that there's an integrated balance of content knowledge for teaching. So not just general, all the things an English major would need to know to be a knowledgeable English major, but what's the content knowledge for teaching? That is particularly appropriate here. The pedagogical content knowledge, so within the context of that content area, what are the unique pedagogical pieces that they would need to know, and then pedagogical strategies, so more general pieces that can support teachers. Performance-based, these are performance-based standards, so as they're being active verbs of things that people can do, and they're intended to be integrated in delivery with their clinical experiences and with our core teaching practices, so that these things layer together and braid well together. You'll notice very explicitly within the mathematics standards, some of that language of the core teaching practices is right there in the standards themselves. But it's not knowledge and skills that are 100% in a pure content gathering thing, like a survey class, and that has no attention to you know, the teaching of this. This doesn't mean you can't have survey classes in your program, but if the status quo of the program had been all survey classes off in one end of the institution and then some general methods classes over in the other part of the institution, that will be very difficult to enact these standards with that complete division. So we're seeing this more performance-based structure and this integrated balance. And there's a great focus on equity throughout and meeting the needs of individual students. We have a higher bar for understanding the multidimensionality of diversity in our student body, and not just visible diversity, but invisible diversity and the student's special needs. And that is called out throughout the standards. We're going to look at each set of standards individually now. Gina will speak to the professional, I'll speak to ELA, and then Darcy will speak to mathematics.
So we're very excited about these professional standards, and many of you in the audience today helped us come up with these professional standards. So thank you for your time and for your thought process in helping us find these. What we're excited about is that this is a set of professional standards that will be required to be paired with any secondary content area. So any 5.9 or 7.12 content area will also be responsible for these professional standards, and it goes to the point where there will be a subtest for it as well. So we're really emphasizing that all of our teachers in Michigan are prepared to be able to provide these specific areas of learner-centered supports, to be able to maintain ethics and have professional growth and maintain strategic partnerships. For learner-centered supports, it's a big section of these standards, but that's where getting to work with kids, getting to know children, getting to know, as Sean said, the multidimensionalities of our children in Michigan and what they all bring to the table in their different ways. Really understanding the needs of learners, to a point where how you're creating your environment to meet those needs, and you're creating instruction that meets those needs. We really look at it's got program and curriculum design, it's got your environmental management pieces, It's got your special ed pieces where all teachers need to understand what is needed when you're working with special education learners in your classroom, and including students with who are English language learners as well. There's also pieces for technology and being able to utilize technology in the classroom. And what we did is we really kind of pointed at the ISTE standards for the technology instead of creating our own little subset, because those ISTE standards are quality technology standards as well. And so that learner-centered support, it's a big chunk of it, but it also includes, you know, how are you addressing the social emotional needs of your students? How are you enacting trauma-informed instruction for your students? And that's going to be a pretty big piece coming up as school eventually gets back to a new normal. There'll be a lot of need for trauma-informed instruction. So that learner-centered supports has a really nice chunk of everything that we're doing. And then the ethics and professional growth really ties into how is our practice ethical? And how do we encourage our teachers to learn and continue to learn and be these lifelong learners? And finally, the strategic partnerships really taps into that whole child framework of, it's not just the child, but it's the community surrounding the child, the school, the family, the exterior community. And so how is a teacher activating all of those partnerships to best teach that whole child? And that includes those in-school partnerships. It includes community partnerships and family. So we're really excited about these professional standards going forward.
Great, thank you. For the ELA standards, there are, it takes its cue from the domain structure of the PK3 and the 3.6 standards in literacy, so that there's continuity across the grade bands. And so the first 4 domains that are listed here, English language arts learning environments, culturally responsive practices, curriculum design and assessment, and motivation and engagement, are straight continuity from the PK3 and the 3.6 literacy domains. So those standards started with the language that was in the 3.6 and then moved it up into 5.9 and 7.12 and modified, obviously, to be to adapt to those older grade bands. Accommodations and differentiated instruction is it's a new domain within this section. It deals with competencies for recognizing recognizing the signs of potential literacy-related disabilities, such as dyslexia, which does get a call out in here, and then how to marshal support for students who need that additional support. Foundations of ELA encompasses several domains that had more detailed treatment in PK3 and 3.6 standards, including foundational skills, fluency, sort of overall literacy, reflecting an expectation for more integrated instruction in the older grade bands, as foundational skills are mastered and developed more in concert with other language arts skills. And so there are call outs to things like phonics and phonemic awareness, because we recognize that at that lower part of the 5.9 grade band, there may be students who have not mastered those skills. And then it sort of gradually decreases, but there's been it's not about, and I'll say this, having said that, it is not about putting in the how to teach reading, like turning the English language arts teacher in, say, 9th grade into a reading specialist or into a reading teacher, like reading standalone skill building. There has to be enough knowledge and skill to understand where students need to be brought forward for additional support, and to recognize when that's there, and then to be able to then get that support for them. But we're not sort of suddenly turning English teachers into like decontextualized reading teachers. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Some extensions from the 3-6 grade band. We have a vocabulary and language study in context that integrates the separate domains for spelling, word study, some of the elements of foundational skills, some syntax and vocabulary, recognizing that in context is absolutely critical, and particularly across content areas. Literacy and literary and rhetorical analysis integrates materials from the comprehension strand in the PK3 and in the 3-6. Composition extends forward, because writing, and speaking and listening. Both composition and speaking and listening are unpacked more. So what you'll notice, what's distinct about these from 3-6, instead of the structure of what is it, how does it develop, how do you teach it, and then how do you assess it, it integrates those with multiple instructional practices that teachers will have. So it goes beyond just 4 things to know about these. I will own it, but there is a very strong emphasis in speaking and listening on developing skills for civil discourse and for proper argumentation, that we think are absolutely critical for the survival of our society. And I'm not being alarmist about it. I think that the standards writers were very, very clear that this is critically important to have here. Speaking and listening shouldn't just be an add-on. Yeah, reading and writing is big, and then speaking and listening that's also there. Oh yeah, and visual representing and that. Nope, speaking and listening have to have equal attention in our English language arts classroom, and not just within English language arts, of course. It should carry over into disciplinary literacies, but I wanted to highlight that and deepen it. Some unique things to the 5.9 and 7.12 standards that are not called out specifically within the 3.6, the prior band. New and digital literacies. It consolidates and deepens some language around non-print literacies and the language arts skills of visual interpretation representation that are spread around in the 3.6, but not in their own spot. And that complements the material in the technology-related standards and the professional standards. So literature focuses on knowledge of texts, provides good continuity with previous English standards, and really extends into the dispositions and habits of mind that are related to literature. And so there's a very strong emphasis on teacher identity as a reader, as a writer, as a consumer of literature. And so that it didn't have its own call out in the 3.6, but has its own call out here. Interestingly enough, is when we went through and examined the existing English standards for the English endorsement in preparation to build this, many of our English programs are very straightforward English majors that there's some foundational literature survey courses, deeper dives into certain eras and genres, and then some culminating experiences, related to the study of literature. And then methods get pushed off. There's a Menka methods class, and there you go. Our standards didn't really promote that in the previous standards. The literature related standards in the English BA are surprisingly limited, yet they're the biggest part of existing programs, and frankly one of the biggest parts of on the test. And so we're hoping then that get more balance here within the new programs that are English language arts. And that's why we're intentional about calling it English language arts. The last piece here is professionalism, and it highlights some unique opportunities for ELA teachers to maintain currency in their field. So professionalism is a strand, and being a reflective practitioner and an active lifelong learner is valued across all of our content areas. This calls out some specific areas within ELA that our ELA teachers should be attendant to. Mathematics, Darcy.
Yeah, so we are really excited about our new mathematics standards. The slide that you are seeing here really describes A, B, C, and D. There are the 4 domains within the standards. And then this graphic shows those 4 domains with what the stakeholders called a pedagogy content disposition triangle, that it can't be separated out from those domains, but it's really woven through. So the graphics intended to kind of show that weaving throughout each of those domains, that they were very mindful and paid close attention to all 3 of those aspects within each of the domains. So for example, within each domain, there are standards, some standards that are more pedagogy focused, some that are more content focused, some that are more disposition focused. But each domain has all 3 throughout. So for example, in domain 1, one example standard is to develop a classroom community in which students present ideas, challenge one another's ideas respectfully, construct meaning together, value and celebrate varied mathematical strengths, and use mathematics to address problems and issues in their schools, homes, and community. So that one, according to the stakeholder authors that were developing these standards, they said that one is more pedagogy focused and more disposition focused. You can kind of hear both of those within the one standard. In domain 2, for example, the standard, one of the standards reads, understand learning progressions within the mathematical content domains that they may teach, which includes knowledge of the mathematics that comes before and after a given mathematics topic. So even though that domain is the domain of students as learners of mathematics, you can hear that that standard has a bit more content focus right within that domain. And it's kind of, how does the content relate to where my students are, and build those learning progressions. In domain 2, again, another one is recognize the importance of eliciting and understanding student experiences and identity in shaping their mathematical thinking. So that's an example of understanding students, but more from a dispositional kind of way, and recognizing that importance of what the students bring. And then finally, an example of domain D, identify and apply a variety of strategies to compare and estimate rational and irrational numbers. And this kind of falls within the areas of the triangle that are both pedagogy and content. So you can kind of see how those 3 aspects are woven throughout. And one thing that we continued through with these 2 grade bands from 3-6 is that the stakeholders were very intentional about having a specific focus on the knowledge and understanding teachers need for teaching, and being very specific about those, just as in the elementary grade bands. And stakeholders were also very intentional about the order of the domains, similar to what Sean mentioned about ELA standards. That's oftentimes content tends to be the key focus, and these domains were actually adopted from AMTE and then modified. And AMTE did have domain D as the first domain, understanding mathematics concepts, practices, dispositions, and curriculum. But our stakeholders were very intentional about that content is really important, but sometimes we tend to be very content heavy focused. And we want to ensure that we're focusing on content that teachers need for teaching and understanding it in the context of the classroom, which is a little bit different way to understand mathematics than than a traditional mathematics degree would be. And I think that wraps up my information about math.
Thank you, Gina.
Alrighty, we have a few accreditation updates. If you have been paying attention to the DARTEP emails, CAPE has released a set of revised standards. Every 7 years, they relook at their standards and make revisions. They had a task force this summer come together and work on the revised standards. And so they're out now for public comment. And that link is in your DARTEP update, though that public comment link will be available through November 2nd. So, and once this public comment period is over, it will go to the council in December and will probably be put into place with a timeline. They haven't really initiated a timeline yet as to when the newer standards would be in effect. But my guess is sometime in early mid 2021, they'll start putting that into effect and then kind of have a rolling timeline as to when you really need to be addressing the new standards. I suggest everybody, at least even if you're not going to do public comment, go check it out. They've changed the standards. There's quite a few changes that have happened. And I think it's for the more reasonable as well. So take a look and see where they are and what they look like to you. I would recommend that. Also, CAPE has put out some information about data gaps because they know there are going to be data gaps from last spring and possibly from this year. They understand that those data gaps are possible. They know that you're having challenges to collecting your data, to completing your processes because you've got those data gaps. You're not able to do certain assessments if candidates weren't in the field. We know that there are going to be gaps for candidates who are doing field experiences outside of student teaching, because we do know, and we have heard that some K-12 partners are not really accepting candidates unless they're student teaching. So, and they also know that it's really hard to get in touch with your partners right now. That some partners have said, we have to focus on ourselves. We can't even engage with you right now. Even strong partnerships are being tested right now. So CAPE understands that, and they wanted us to know, and this was something that they were talking to the state reps about a couple of weeks ago, is that what they're looking for is that you document all of it. Document where you can't get data, document when your partnerships aren't coming through because of situations in the environment or because of what's going on. Document what you're doing instead. So if you suddenly realize, oh, all of my regular assessments aren't going to make it because that's all field-based, how else are you assessing your candidate then? What did you do to make up for the things you couldn't get? Document all of that, and then document any long-term changes that came as a result of that. And that's pretty much what they're looking for you to do over this next year and a half. And the other piece that I just want to say that I hope helps people is every person who's coming to review any institution, they're going through this too. They're all peer reviewers. So everyone who's a site visitor, who will be a site visitor in 3 years and is going to look at this data gap, they all know what happened. So that clear documentation will keep you right on top. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you. You're on mute, Sean.
There we go. I'd actually have the debrief slide later in the or intended for it to pop up later in the presentation because we have that toward the end, but we are about 20 minutes or so ahead of our agenda. So Lori, I defer to you for what.
Thank you. First of all, Darcy, Gina, and Sean, thank you for those details. It's really helpful to have that information, and just appreciate the time that you put into putting the slides together and meeting with us. So I want to make sure you know we appreciate that. I'm going to go through the questions that came up on in the chat box. and start with, Beth had a question. It says, so the elementary subject matter tests will be available longer than the regular elementary test?
Yes. Yeah, the BX, the EX tests will be available longer. I know that many programs are not planning this. However, because we have the because I've heard this from some institutions, that when you roll out the new PK3 and 3.6, that they were going to then shutter the BX and the EX and those elementary, sorry, the K8 content area things. And that's absolutely fine. You can do that. But while we're onboarding PK3 and 3.6 and then onboarding 5.9 and 7.12, there will be this overlap space where it'd be possible to have PK3 plus K8 language arts added onto it, or 3.6 with K8 mathematics. That is an entirely possible thing to do. And so again, I know that, and I've heard this because it's been, I think it's common enough that it's been a throwaway comment in multiple emails that I've gotten that said, well, of course, as we build PK3 and 3.6, we're going to close BX and we're going to close EX for K8. And I said, you can, you don't have to, not until we onboard those new 5.9 and 7.12 programs. One of the things that I imagined in this, and again, this also comes from a lot of comments that people make. They'll say, well, we have an elementary program and we have a middle school math program. Well, not really. Those standards are supposed to be, it's a K8 endorsement right now. But for a long time, it appeared as a 6.8 on people's certificates, so as not to create redundancy, not to create confusion that somehow somebody who was had an elementary certificate without a mathematics endorsement couldn't teach math. And they absolutely can. And so it was listed as 6.8, and so I've heard from many that they're what we would call an elementary content area, like language arts or mathematics, is being called or has been called a middle school, or has been called a 6.8 program, really focusing in on the things you have to do to get it are the things that apply most to 6.8 rather than things that apply to K5, because K5 gets covered in the elementary. And so I imagined, well, when we introduce the 5.9 grade band and people think their program is 6.8, that's not that big a transition. If they've really tailored that program to be exclusively 6.8, then they can expand that a little bit to 5.9. Beth had posed another question, and you'll probably come to it, Lori, which is in the ELA standards, there's not a distinction written between the 5.9 and the 7.12 grade bands. And I will tell you, the stakeholders were challenged to do this many times. Though, if any of you were in the meetings, between emails and meetings, it's like, okay, read through these. What's good for 5.9? What's good for 7.12? What do we call out more exclusively? And they said, these are practices, and these practices are good across both grade bands. And so, but what's different is the audience, the context. The kids are going to be different, and the literature will often be different. So the texts, and if we think of I used a graphic several years ago, the context pyramid of you've got a teacher, a classroom, students, and then materials. In the context pyramid, the students and the materials are going to be different, of a different flavor for 5.9 than they will be for 7.12. And so that's where that distinction will come. I'm hoping to be able to convene some additional ELA, some of the original stakeholders from the ELA standards, as well as others who are interested, to unpack some resources for the back end. So you saw the PK3 and the 3.6 when they came out, they didn't have a bibliography, and now they do. The bibliography unpacks several little concepts, a glossary. I want to do that for the 59712 ELA, and Darcy's doing that right now with the 59712 mathematics. That would help draw some of that out a little bit more in terms of the how you would distinguish between those two. But we've got to get to that. I don't have a literacy consultant right now to convene that group, so that's part of it.
Beth is going to ask a question. Sean, go ahead, Beth.
Okay, this is why you invite me, because I have the low bar of understanding. So just to be clear, it sounds like the K-8 subject matter, math, ELA, those major minors that are with our elementary, and most people couple with the elementary, those are going to still be alive until you tell us they die.
Right.
All right. And so they're kind of acting as the de facto. So for instance, now we're keep doing our same secondary. The elementary is going to get changed and the secondary keeps going. These are kind of the de facto middle school keep going. And you're because I'm just trying to figure it out. So they can keep the DI elementary or the DI secondary. The DI elementary can keep going even though it's elementary that it's coupled with is changed.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's okay. So that's that clarity. And the second part is, if you don't have any differentiation between the middle and the high school, I'll just use those language, endorsements in the standards. If we create a program that attends to all the standards, how we could technically submit the same program, call it middle, call it high school, and if two different reviewers are looking at it, we could get approved and it could be exactly the same program. If we're just doing the lines with the standards. And that, so I'm wondering, what is MDE going to expect from us in our applications to show a differentiation between something that's written to the exact same standards document?
Right. That's an excellent question. We have to unpack that in our application processes, our application procedures. If you've noticed in the supplemental pieces to the PK3 and the 3.6, we have some direct questions about how are you attending to the PK part of the PK3, and then and as well as the grade 3. So how are you hitting those ends of it? Ditto in the 3.6. We would do that with our 5.9 and 7.12. If you're offering,
but you don't have, but if you don't have anything listed for the 5.9 and 7.12 to which we can point, then you're, so if I have a developmental course with adolescents of 10-year-olds to 18-year-olds or something, or so just, you don't have to do it now,
right.
But I'm just saying that's information we really need. Whoops, you can't see me. Sorry.
No. Darcy, you would wanted to respond.
I think there are pieces in the standards that if you read it carefully, you'll notice that there'll be phrases like as appropriate to this age student or to all students. And so those pieces would be the places where you would want to differentiate and make sure that this is appropriate for the grade band this program is intended for, right? And make some of those differentiations. I know that's not a hard and fast, easy answer. It's going to take some sussing out, but it's in there.
But to the point, at least with my ELA faculty or the ones getting back to me, and I'm not an ELA person, as you well know,
sure.
I'm just that kind of clarity, because it sounds like what you're saying. Here's a document. We put these together. If I write a program that attends to that document, I don't know how it can be turned down for either middle school or high school if we make the claim that this, you know, that we've decided this literature fits for middle school. You don't tell us it doesn't. You know, so just that kind of clarity would be very helpful. I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining.
This is, it's very, I mean, and this has been on my mind for over a year, since we had the draft of the standards, and like, how do we differentiate? How should we do this? I think one way to respond to faculty is look at what you're doing in the language arts, you know, in the BX program versus the BA program right now, and how are you attending to that upper range in the BX program as compared to the BA program? Are those courses all the same? Do they cross both programs of study? And if so, I mean, there's significant overlap between 5.9 and 7.12. I mean, it's 5 and 6 are the things that aren't covered in the 7.12. So I would expect that there would be some significant overlap in coursework for that. So for those institutions that do have BX and BA, looking at how you differentiate that right now would be a useful lens for going through those standards. But it is something, yes, we do need to address for you with a little more guidance than just, well, can they pass the test? Which it's not fair.
So Beth indicated that she's having some difficulty with her microphone. So I'm going to go to the next question from Kelly. When will other secondary areas aside from math and ELA be held to offering programs that contain the new professional standards? Maybe we already covered this. Science and social studies as well as world language.
Yeah, the science and social studies, as soon as they come out, they're paired with the same professional standards. Those professional standards cover across those larger content areas. We have a plan to take a look at all of the professional standards and create a group that will devise a K-12 set in the future. We don't have a timeline for that yet, but that is a next step in the professional standards development.
Okay, thank you.
I would say that currently, if you wanted to pair the new professional standards with your existing science and social studies, for example, programs, you could do so as well.
Absolutely.
And K-12, right? Yeah.
Oh, hi, it's Kelly.
Hi, Kelly.
So that's as the math and English language arts standards sort of start rolling and we start having programs, we're going to be in this situation where we have our secondary candidates split across implementation timelines. Mm-hmm. And so if I could paraphrase what you just said, it's up to us to decide how to handle the not content specific parts of our secondary programs in terms of when everyone other than math and English language arts starts a new program, new requirements for the professional standards.
Yeah, we won't, yes. Because we won't have a specific separate set for those, for the K-12 especially. But, right.
And they aren't replacing a different set either.
Right.
Because it's new. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Darcy, can you say that last thing again, please?
I just said the professional standards aren't replacing an old set of professional standards. It's a brand new set of standards that we didn't have standards for professional before.
Right. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna move it along. I think we have time for one or two more questions. And so the next question is from Amy. Can we count fieldwork experiences credits from community colleges as a part of our programs? And what are the expectations for embedding the CTPs in BDK programs? By count, I mean, can they transfer in field experiences as well?
So the expectation is that the 600 minutes are met by the time graduation. There's not a requirement that they all have to be met in your program. This is where those articulation agreements would really, really come in handy if you're able to create an articulation agreement with a community college to where you accept certain amounts of their field experiences, or at least have a connection partnership with those four-year programs that are coming in to see if you can evaluate those field experiences and accept them. I really think at that 2-year level, that's where your candidates are going to get a lot of that home visiting and infant toddler experience. And then moving into that 4-year program could move more into those early childhood and early childhood special education experiences. So absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Very helpful.
Oh, wait, and then
the
core
next-
teaching practices. I'm so sorry. There was one
Yes,
other piece
I was
to
going to
that.
say, address that part too.
Yep. Yes, core teaching practices are expected in the BK programs, the same as the PK3 and 3-6. We're expecting that to be embedded across the program, and you'll have opportunities in the application to let us know how that's happening.
Okay, very good. So this is the last question before break, and I also want to have a minute to talk about after break how we're going to go into job-alike sessions. So the question is from Sherry: how do faculty sign up to be reviewers? Should we only provide reviewers during the cycle when we are applying?
So you can submit reviewers on the intent to submit form, but I'm going to defer to Sean and Gina on if it's only for the cycle that we're reviewing. I think that we've talked about that we'd appreciate them for more than just that cycle, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, if they're available for, and it would be great. I think it would be a good professional learning opportunity if you're planning to submit next November. If you have some individuals who are available to review programs submitted this November, I think it would be very helpful. I mean, there is obviously, as there is with all of things, a confidentiality expectation. But I think it would be great if your institution is wrestling with some way to reconcile some element of the standards or how to address it, seeing how another institution is doing it in the context of review could be very, very helpful and informative to your own program. But yeah, that the more reviewers, the better. Absolutely.
I would like to also encourage additional early childhood faculty because we have 2 layers of early childhood review. We need review teams for the BK, and we also need early childhood people on the PK3 reviews. So we kind of need more early childhood faculty than we have. So I really, really encourage submitting early childhood faculty to our review teams.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So we will take a break, and we have from 10:45 to 11 o'clock. And then at 11 o'clock, when you registered, you should have signed up for your job-alike session. And so you'll be put into a group with, or put into your group for your session. And we have one person that will be taking notes. And then we should have another person that will facilitate your group. And it seems that it might be best to use the chat function for questions, but maybe in your group, the facilitator and note taker could determine the best way to include a discussion or ask questions. So we will, after that, so you will have from 11 to 11:30. And if you are a facilitator or note taker, can you please also monitor the time so that at 11:30 we can come back together and do our report outs. Okay, so we will see you back, or see some of you back in 15 minutes. Thank you. Be willing to share some of the things that we talked about in our session?
Sure. We had an informal discussion about the Mitten organization prior to, as people were joining. So I'm not reflecting it in the formal minutes, but I want to at least make reference that the presentation this afternoon from Paula Lancaster, Sean Lancaster, and Karen On, that I'll address our fourth core practice that was left out of the picture from the COVID cancellation in April. We'll kind of answer some of those Mitten questions. So just to put a plug in there for the work that you'll see this afternoon, and a ton of wonderful slides that you have available to you through the DARTEP listserv concerning social emotional learning, etc. So more on that later. The deans and directors participants introduced themselves, and our MDE representative was Sean Kotke. The CAPE standards revisions were referenced in terms of how these apply to an institution after they've already been approved. And the question also kind of drifted into, well, if you've already been approved, or what if you're in the middle of submitting and things change? So it kind of went both sides of that coin. Sean responded to it by saying, and perhaps Gina can address this at a later time, but that you often write to the standards that are in force when you're submitting, but you attend to the changes as during that 7 years that you're approved, you work towards those changes. Maybe Gina, you can jump in and clarify, because we went on both sides of that question. I heard it as I typed as like, if you've already been approved and things change, what do you do? But then we kind of went to the other side of that question of, what if you're in the process of submitting and things change? And I think those are different questions.
Yeah, they are. But I do think that the changes they made really fold into what's already there as a process. And if they did anything, they pulled things back, then added things on. So I think if you stay this course of what you've already got going, and then look at those changes and see what adjustments you can make reasonably, because we all know, and CAPE expects, I mean, that continuous improvement process takes time. So you don't make quick changes anyway. You make changes based on data and other pieces, and it takes time for that and stakeholder input. So I would say maintain the course. The changes, like I said, I think they pull back a little bit, then add. So what you have going now should suffice fine for the changes they make. And then once they're released and they're actually in force, you can really start taking a look at, okay, do we need to pull back on something here and add over here to collect more of this kind of data? They're really trying to emphasize the equity piece a little more. So that's something that I think we're all doing. So being able to measure that might be a neat thing to add in, but stay the course. I don't think it's too drastic.
Great, because that's really what I concluded in the notes, that discussion about how to write to standards as they evolve was really where we left off. And another question concerning the integration of content and pedagogy when students join programs as transfer students or as accelerated students, and specifically with reference to concern for the Mttc and how it could be a screening test for entrance when in fact more pedagogical components are now front and center. And you're getting a test that, they haven't taken the pedagogical components yet. We relied on Mttc tests as kind of like a barometer, and now that's not, we have to perhaps watch this space. We talked a little bit about this from some examples of working with our community college partners or schools that feed the students to us to ensure that our curriculum and our expectations are aligned, and that our community college partners are aware of the content, the pedagogy, and the clinical experiences that are required in the new program. So there's some discussion on that front. Accommodating students within field placements when they do not feel comfortable about being in person for these clinical placements was discussed. Question about coverage of the cost for COVID-19 testing for student teachers was also asked. Many reported that the universities themselves covered it even if the student was in a remote location. And we talked a lot about how we anticipate things to be similar to the way they are now in terms of the variability of in-person blended P12 learning situations, and that how we have to be flexible and attend to students' needs, apprehensions, and concerns relative to their health and well-being.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that summary. I'd like to move on to certification officers. Is there someone that would be willing to share from that session?
Hi, this is Christine Lancaster from EMU. I'd be happy to share a little bit about our discussion. We talked about temporary cert, some tests about testing, civil criminal convictions, and then some different certification timelines. So the temporary certification, the deadline to have applied for that was ended on September 30th. It was agreed that students have been able to now schedule the MTTC test, and that students are able to get the CPR and first aid training. Although the CPR first aid is usually through a hybrid model. So the waiver of the adult and child CPR ended on September 30th as well. The temporary one-year authorization is a calendar year. Once students pass the test, then they'll just apply for certification through the normal route. And if they don't pass the test, then once that year is up from the time they got their certification, they won't be certified. We talked about some test deadlines. It was recommended that the sunset dates be put on like one document that could be put on MDE, so that there's kind of that one location that we could refer students to that would keep updated on what those deadlines are. But it was also noted that that information is available on the MTTC website. When you go to that test, it'll say when the deadlines are. The last date for the PE MTTC will be September 30th, 2023. We talked about the email for civil criminal concerns. They were going directly to Stephanie Whiteside's email. There's now a separate email address specifically for those concerns to be sent to, and the people that were there have that website, have that email address. I could provide it to anyone who needs it. Social work, we talked a little bit about the social work. Currently it's approved by, if I understand correctly, because I haven't been involved in it, but if I understand correctly, currently social work is approved by the university's, the university's social work program. It's called an approval. We talked about when that would be changing over to the certification officer, and there isn't a timeline on that right now, but the rules are expected to be going out for public comment in the spring. And I think Lucas just put on the chat the address for the MDE professional practice civil criminal thing. And then lastly, Krista put a link up for the special education personnel approval. It's been a little bit confusing, and so a place where we can go and learn more about that. I can't hear you.
Thank you, Christine. We're going to move on to accreditation, and we have about 5 minutes left. So just try to keep within that window. Doug, and then I believe Jane Genzink is after for Director of Field Experiences.
Well, I'll go ahead and be very brief. We actually had just a couple of conversations. One, we talked about the standards, the CAPE standards, and the review process going on right now. We are all encouraged to review those standards and to offer some public comment. An example of where we could maybe have our voice heard is standard 3.2, that wonderful standard that we all deal with in terms of candidate quality. They did discuss creating a process for academic proficiency, but that was taken away during the final editing process. And I'm talking about if you don't have those SAT, ACT kind of scores as a baseline for information. Maybe during public comment, if we put enough pressure on CAPE, that might show back up as a potential option of creating an academic proficiency model in lieu of standardized test scores. We also talked about writing reports, and an example in Standard 5 of monitoring candidate progress was discussed. Beth talked about the best way to write those particular reports. Having data available is the most important thing. I think one comment was that bad data is still better than no data at all. The rejoinder was discussed in terms of the whole process and how important that rejoinder is as a final opportunity to state your case. You cannot add any more evidence, but you can point to the evidence that you've had. Missing data because of COVID, again, was discussed. As long as you document what's missing, what did you try to do, and what will you do instead, were the three main points of takeaway from that particular conversation. And then AQEP right at the end was discussed very briefly. They need to be accredited before they can be considered as an option for accreditation for us. That's it for accreditation.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, Kristen.
Yeah, hi. I am speaking for the field experience coordinators, and no surprise, our biggest discussion topic was about the struggle getting placements right now. So a lot of creative ideas were shared, but we also talked about now we're hitting new struggles with schools not allowing candidates to film themselves since supervisors can't come in. And so just trying to figure out how to get feedback for our student teachers, even though our supervisors are limited in how they can see them teach. Other struggles, we're not getting responses from schools, so turning to a lot of online or virtual instruction as an opportunity to get hours. There was a question about whether there will be another adjustment to the required number of hours. It doesn't sound like that's the case right now. So just looking for ways to find observation or experience outside of the traditional classroom experience. And there's a list of great ideas that I put on the agenda for people to look at later.
Very good. Thank you for sharing to each of you. So we will have a half-hour break for lunch. And then at 12:15, we'll begin with the Michigan Social Emotional Learning Alliance. And very excited about that session, excuse me. And then we'll go into core practices focus on building respectful relationships. So have a good lunch break, and we'll see you back at 12:15. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our after lunch sessions. We get to begin today with the Michigan Social Emotional Learning Alliance, and that will be led by, and forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong, Lauren, but Lauren Casey, Lisa Gallagher, and Wendy Burke. So I'm going to turn it over to them. Welcome to this meeting. Thank you so much for joining us, and we are very much looking forward to hearing from you today.
Thank you. You were close. It's Lauren Kazee, so close. We had slides. Is somebody going to share those somehow?
Yes, I think that
looks like Sean's got it.
There you go. Perfect. So we are so excited. I have to tell you guys a couple things. One, I woke up at 1:30 this morning because I could hear my daughter talking, of course, right? I have an almost 19-year-old living here with me. But I could not go back to sleep because I was so excited about this meeting today. So I thought, okay, Lauren, this is ridiculous. You're going to be a zombie if you don't get some sleep before you talk to these people. But I was so excited. And I was also happy to know that you guys had lunch. before we talked to you. Because when I saw 12:15 to 1, I thought, oh no, we're going to have a bunch of hungry people on our hands. But now we just have people who are in food comas. So we'll try to keep this entertaining for you. I am so excited to be able to have this opportunity to share with you and to be able to co-present with Lisa Gallagher, who I love dearly. She and I are tag teaming the SEL work at the department, and she'll introduce herself to you as when we get to her slides. And then my heart also adores Wendy Burke, who is one of your members, and so there's overlap there, but she has been side by side with us through all of this SEL work in Michigan as well. So I'm thrilled that she can share with you at the end, and she'll introduce herself when we get to her slides. And I also saw that Cindy Carver is here from Oakland, so I just want to give a shout out to her. So anyway, I am grateful to be able to share, and I will get started. So I have done some work at the Department of Education contractually since 2008. I took a little bit of time off around 2017. And then when COVID happened, they called and said, please come back. We will reinstate a contract with you, which was a blessing because I've, again, been able to jump back into this work more at the state level instead of just more on the local level, and work collaboratively with Lisa, which has been a pleasure. So our opportunity today is to share with you a little bit about the Michigan SEL Alliance that kind of started with all of the institutes of higher ed that I will get to in a minute. But before we get into that, I wanted to just give a little context about SEL. So, oh, yeah, you're fine. You're fine, Brian. You're exactly right. So I'm hoping, though, just to keep you guys awake after lunch, you would do a little fun game with me, SEL bingo. So on the screen, you can see some different emotions. So I'm hoping that you can pick the emotion that you felt when this meeting started earlier today. So I know for me, I already told you guys I was 1D because I was so excited to have this opportunity to talk to all of you. So if you could put in the chat what your emotion was when you started this morning, and my dear friend Lisa is monitoring the chat for us during this time. And then maybe how that emotion impacted how you processed. So I'm seeing people popping in all sorts of different emotions. Thank you everybody for participating. And when you think about how you felt, I saw some overwhelmed, I saw some happy, some maybe shy, oh no, tired. I expected to see a bunch of tireds.
Hopeful.
Hopeful.
Lots of hopefuls.
Great, I love hopeful. Thank you, we've got to stay hopeful. So when you think about that emotion and how it impacts the way that you process information. So for those of you who are tired, you maybe are thinking like, oh, how much longer for this meeting? Thank God it's Friday. I'm ready for a weekend, even though it's going to be a chilly one. But you know, maybe some of you feeling hopeful are like taking it all in, and you're leaning in and you're taking notes and you're thinking about how this relates to your work on your day-to-day level. And so the practice, this activity is something that we do with students in schools across the state. It's something we can do in a college class. It's something that we help professionals to think about. The point of this activity is that our emotions impact how we process information. And so I think all of us, that's kind of an understood belief. So that if we are working with students in a classroom who are coming in hungry or tired, like I said, I was glad you guys had lunch because I was a little worried, like, oh no, people are going to be hungry when we talk to them. That people are not able to process the information. I know for the work that I've done with students, if they have had any kind of trauma, or they haven't had breakfast, or their mom and her fourth boyfriend were fighting all night, they have a hard time attending to algebra and social studies. And especially in this time of COVID, when everybody is remote, that just exacerbates these issues even more. So SEL is needed now more than ever before. And that really is the focus, is to help us and help students to think about how they're feeling and how to regulate those feelings so that they can attend to the task at hand. All right, Brian. So SEL is, again, just basically what I said, helping students to be able to identify their emotions. How are they feeling about that pop test? that pop quiz in math, like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready. I don't understand this unit. And then if they feel that way, then what do? Many times kids in class, what we've seen over the course is if they're anxious or not ready, they may pick a fight with somebody to get sent out of class, to go to the office so they can avoid that task. And so again, SEL, helping kids to identify what they're feeling, but then helping them to learn how to regulate those emotions in a way that is conducive for education in a positive way. The other point of SEL is to think about how to socialize and interact with other people in a positive manner. So there's a lot of education around skill building for relationships, social awareness, and how to recognize and interact with people who maybe look different or think different or have a different set of values. That's something huge that we need in our society right now, right? Like all of this social unrest, all of the political things that are happening, social awareness is so crucial, not just for our students, but for adults in the school as well. And then again, helping students to make responsible decisions. Before Brian changes the slide, I want to point out that it's not just about youth, but it's also about adults. And the thing that we've focused on in Michigan for a long time has been student skills and student mental health. What I am hoping to do and have started to do in the last several years is to shift that focus to look at the grown-ups in the school. Because you know, I'm sure many of you know, like that saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right? And that definitely is true in my house, but it's also true in a school, right? So if the teacher isn't doing well, if they're not happy, healthy, feeling valued, have good morale, then chances are they don't have what they need to be able to pour into the students who are in the classroom that also have needs. And so the main shift for us here in Michigan is to also think about the adults. All of you, all of your students that you're teaching and educating who are going to be teachers, the current teachers, how can we work with them around their self-care and their wellness and then their SEL skills so that they can model what we are hoping to see in children. Okay, Brian. You're killing it. Thank you, Brian. So here are the 5 nationally recognized components of SEL. And these come from CASEL, and CASEL is an acronym, stands for the Collaborative of Academic, Social, Emotional Learning. So CASEL, many of you are maybe familiar. And these are their 5 competencies that we have adopted in Michigan as our own. Some states around the country have modified, some have 6, some have pushed some of these together, Kansas, all different states. But here in Michigan, we're just riding the line and we're staying true to CASEL, and these are our 5. So just to touch base on them briefly, the 5 are, again, self-awareness, which I've mentioned a couple of times already today. So thinking about and being able to identify how you feel. Stressed, anxious, tired, hopeful, all of those things that you guys were able to do in our first activity. And then the second skill, or the second component, is to help kids, again, manage those emotions. How do they behave based on how they feel? So, and I've given an example of how kids could, be anxious about a test, so they act out, or maybe kids withdraw and they don't participate in class because of their feelings. So again, wanting kids to teach them the skills on how to manage those emotions. Social awareness, I've mentioned already. So again, thinking about how you interact with people who are different than you. And being kind is really, I think, what it boils down to. Relationship skills, and then again, enter those interpersonal skill set and how to start a conversation, good listening skills, how to not interrupt, which we've all learned how to do a lot on Zoom, I think, right? Everybody's taking their turn. The point that I want to make about relationship skills is as I have worked with schools around the state, is to not just think about those peers, right? How do students interact with one another, but how are the adults acting with one another? There have been numerous times that I've been in schools and have seen educators bullying one another. Students have told me about experiences they've had when they've seen other teachers or maybe administrators talking down to other teachers. So again, thinking about that adult modeling of behaviors for students. So it's So it's staff, it's peers, but it's also staff to student. Because then again, in the work that I've done with schools, I hear that a lot too, where students will say, man, this teacher just called me out in front of the class. Like one student said, a teacher stood up in front of the class and was like, you know, so-and-so student, you obviously didn't take your medication today, in front of the whole class. And the kid was mortified, like, why would you say that? So again, helping every person in the school to think about the importance of how we communicate with one another, how we interact with one another, and those important relationship skills. And then finally, responsible decision making. So helping students as their brains are developing, right? As they're going from here to here and getting to that frontal cortex part and that executive functioning part, to help them think about that if-then kind of statement, right? If I behave this way, how is that going to impact whatever the consequences may be? If I study really hard for this test, I could pass it. Or if I blow this off, then I'm not going to pass, or I'm going to be behind if I don't come to school. So helping students to think about those responsible decision-making process. Okay, so the goals of SEL are these things, which all of us, I assume, are on the same page, and all of us would want this for our schools. So again, to promote that interpersonal skills, right? How do kids, how do people interact with one another and by themselves? So having a strong social emotional ability and skill set. We want everybody to feel good, hopeful. We want them to feel hopeful about their environment and about their ability to learn and to be educated and to become a productive citizen in school. My almost 19-year-old here has a hard time. She's not necessarily the most academic kid, but I have tried to do Jedi mind tricks with her for 18 years, or well, 13 years, she's been in school, that you can do this. You love math. And she gets, you know, special education support for math. But I have said to her for 15 years, you love math. Math is your favorite. And so now, even though it's one of the hardest subjects for her, if you say, what's your favorite subject in school? She'll say math, because I've tried to program her to think she can do it. Positive attitudes, positive belief. And then we also, SEL, we want it to help us to improve in adjustments, which is, again, more timely now than ever before as we're doing all of this remote learning. And then finally, I think the piece that maybe resonates the most with all of us as educators and in this education space is that we want to see less conduct problems, less issues at school, less referrals to the office, more time in the seat, more time in class, and ultimately a better academic achievement, which is exactly what we plan and hope for SEL. So guess what, friends? That's exactly what happens. So they've done research, hundreds and hundreds of studies around the country to look at when schools implement SEL, what are the outcomes? And here's what we've seen. It's exactly what we wanted to see, right? All of those goals are happening when schools really take SEL with integrity, with fidelity, school-wide, which is, again, our focus here in Michigan is how do we have systemic SEL in our buildings, not just in a few classes, but across the board. Everybody's involved, everybody's committed to it. Lisa's going to talk about that more, but it's exactly what we see, that those social skills improve, positive attitudes improve, academics improve by 13 percentile points, right? So that's pretty significant. And all of the behaviors that we don't want to see also decrease. So again, it's such an important aspect of this culture of being able to learn and helping students to be more productive when they leave our schools, go to higher education, leave higher education, and go on to work. I think I'm done. Nope, oh, I'm not. Okay. So I was about to kick it to you early, Lisa. I'm trying to watch my time. So I provided with you all a timeline of how we've kind of gotten to this place in Michigan. I have to laugh though, because there's three things, right? And it started in 2013, and when I look at this and it's condensed into such a small amount, and I feel like I've spent so much time working on this, I was a little bit like, what? 3 arrows? But there's a million things underneath each of these arrows. But just for your purposes, I did consolidate. I do have a 2-pager of timelines if you want to see the whole kit and caboodle. But we started this work in 2013. Kyle Garant at the Department of Ed said, Lauren, start working on the SEL competencies. And so I pulled together representatives from every office in the department, including professional prep. Leah Breen and her folks were at the table. And we looked at competencies that were written in other states, which at that time were only 4 states. And now we're at 30 states at least that have competencies, but we were one of the first, the pioneering states. And we spent a lot of time with that group of people at the department, with representatives from across the department, writing these competencies, vetting them. I went out and met with stakeholders around the state, 71 different educators from all different walks of life to give me input into the competencies. And then they were approved in August of 2017, which was one of the best days of my life, besides the birth of my children. And then that was another birth of a child. That was another child. And then in October, as I was doing that stakeholder input around, I got in touch with people at U of M, at Michigan State, at EMU, other districts in Macomb and other places around. And what I was finding is that these 3 in particular universities were really starting to focus on SEL in their teacher prep programs. And so they gave input to the competencies and into the documents. And I was running around meeting with all of them. And then I thought, this is crazy. Why am I doing this to myself? Let's all come together. So I pulled those 3 university reps together just for like a little networking meeting. And they loved it and they wanted to keep meeting. And so that is when the Michigan SEL Alliance was begun. And we've continued to meet twice a year since then, March and October, every year, even virtually. And that group has grown and grown and grown. I think that's the next slide. Dun, 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 dun. Yes. So thank you, Brian. So these are the 6 universities that are represented thus far. And our door's always open. We're happy to welcome anybody else who wants to come to the party. And we meet again twice a year, these 6 different universities, to think about how we can collectively and collaboratively move SEL forward in Michigan. So we've got people at the table from the K-12 world, obviously from this higher ed world, and from different intermediate school districts, the champions in the state of SEL who are coming together twice a year to think about how we can do this work together instead of, everybody kind of working on their own, coming together to do it that way. This is my last slide. Get ready, Lisa. So here is really what we have convened around. It's come and gone. We've kind of tweaked it. We've gone around and around trying to really center ourselves around our mission. And this is where we've landed most recently. And there's always time and opportunity to revise and tweak things as we go. But we've come around these 3 focus areas. And the first one I think is probably the most important because it really is for us as a group, there's about 25 of us, to really think about what does it take for a school to implement SEL systemically. And even before all of the social unrest and the anti-racism issues that arose over the summer, which are very important, we actually had been talking about how do we think about equity in SEL. So how can we ensure that when schools take up this banner and they start to really implement SEL in a systemic way, how do we make sure that the ground is fertile and that they're ready to go and that they consider that equity is just as important as all of these other pieces? So that group of people really do think about the kind of the readiness part of implementation of SEL. And then the second core area is how do we help people who are either heading into education or currently in education to get it, right? How do we help them to think about their own social and emotional learning and how to instill that in the students that they're working with? So we focus on, getting that professional development established and disseminated. And then finally, thinking about the research. So what does the research say when we start to do this work? This is so new in the field that there isn't a lot of assessment knowledge and data there for student moving that needle. And so this really is focusing on making sure that we can ground the work that we're doing in evidence-based practices and research. So now I think I took more than 10 minutes. I'm sorry, Lisa, I tried. So I'm passing the baton to Lisa, and then Wendy will go from there.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Gallagher. I'm at the Michigan Department of Education, and I'm the MDE Social and Emotional Learning Lead, but really I'm part of Team Lauren. And I want to just publicly acknowledge it was Lauren that brought the competencies to the department. She developed the online learning modules that are free and available through Michigan Virtual, and it was her brainchild to form Mycella, which is actually my favorite meeting to attend 2 times a year. I just feel alive to be so companioned by people who are committed to social and emotional learning. A little bit about me is that I am a counseling psychologist. I was a high school English teacher at one of those big high schools in the 80s, Hinsdale South High School on the west side of Chicago. And I noticed that that was when the research was coming out about big, large high schools, about the fact that kids felt isolated, disconnected. Often they'd moved quite a lot because transferring was big, or families would move into Chicago and then move back out. And I noticed how important feeling connected, how connected that was to academics. So I think that's a through line for all my work. At the department, I helped develop the Michigan Profile for Healthy Youth. And that will give a reflection of children's risk and protective factors. And I helped develop the Superintendent's Dropout Challenge. And if we think about whether or not schools have what they call academic optimism, teams, trust, and high expectations, it's the relational trust that I'm so interested in. And if those foundational social and emotional learning skills that Lauren was talking about are evident in caring adults, I think that modeling and that warm invitational school climate is available for children to try to risk to develop their social and emotional skills. It has to be psychologically safe for them to be able to do that. So at the department, I want you to know where SEL sits in our newly revised top 10 and 10 goals. Dr. Rice joined us more than a year ago and wanted to make sure that these goals were something that were easy to articulate. So systemic social and emotional learning sits within improve the health, safety, and wellness of learners. And that's the 3rd bullet down. Sean, if you'd move the slide for me. We don't want to ever have a goal that doesn't have a metric associated. So the 2 data sources for the Michigan Department of Education's accomplishment of that goal is with the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. It's that every other year survey that in aggregate students report and schools report, and then the state has an aggregate report of children's risk and protective factors, the YRBS, and then the MyFi. So if you would think about social and emotional learning in terms of risk and protective factors, that responsible decision-making, the relationship skills, and then the self-awareness and social awareness all translate into how children are demonstrating those behaviors. So when we think about SEL, you could imagine that if you had strong relationships at school, you'd be more likely to attend. So that 2nd bullet would be directly related to the degree to which schools are supporting social and emotional learning, both at the adult level and at the child level. You also want to think about social and emotional learning within an MTSS context of what's going on at Tier 1, and are those foundational social and emotional skills available to children, integrated into academics? Do we have a 24/7 approach towards supporting children in their social and emotional learning? Do we have adults demonstrating that? And the degree to which that foundational piece is in place is the degree to which we're helping children reduce the likelihood that they might be exhibiting anxiety or depression. So if that foundational piece is in place, it's not that that's not going to happen. It's just that we know that we want social and emotional learning to be in place in a proactive and preventive way. If you would switch the next slide. Thank you. We know that if our SEL work is going well, children will report less bullying. They'll be less sad and hopeless. They're less likely to consider suicide. But we also know that there's an interrelationship between these metrics. So the degree to which they're healthy and well, that whole child approach is the degree to which we're going to see overall positive outcomes. Finally, we're living in a time where we want to look at improvement in health and improvement in academics, not just academics. Next slide, please. So at the department, because we have a superintendent who's led his own social and emotional learning community of practice at the national level through the American Association of Superintendents, ASA, I think the name of it is, he's wanted to make sure that we had in parallel form great work going on at the department. So we have a systemic SEL work group at the department. I'm the lead for that. Lauren is part of it. We have cross-office representation, and we wanted to start to look at district-wide social and emotional learning, because we know if a teacher is in a classroom and that's not anchored to an infrastructure, then that's a very person-dependent example. We want statewide, we want schoolhouse to state house, we want district-wide, and we want to look more broadly than just classroom. So our social and emotional learning work group has said, well, if we're going to define it, here are the features that we want to make sure in place. That we have shared purpose, and you can see that in the top 10 and 10 goals, that it's sustainable, that it's anchored by an infrastructure. So when we think about the WISC model, which is that partnership between ASCD and the CDC to assure that children feel safe, healthy, engaged, supported, and challenged, that infrastructure shows the places where social and emotional learning is anchored in the district. In addition, we want to make sure that our SEL instruction, our modeling, our support doesn't just happen in the class. We want children to have opportunities to be connected to caring adults before school, after school, in the community, and at home. And so that means the more they're likely to have all the caring adults modeling pro-social skills is the degree to which the children want to follow that, and they're gonna that's gonna make more sense if everywhere they go they're getting encouraged. That's a real standard youth development approach. And then finally, especially in the times that we're living, we don't want to look at equity as a grafted on or a second thought. We want to say that SEL is inseparable from equity, and we've gotten a lot of support from the Castle group that Lauren mentioned to make sure that we were able to operationalize what would that look like. So I don't know about you, but SEL is something that because we get to talk to other states who at each state's Department of Education, we have our job alikes in SEL, but it seems that we finally have the prominence of the role of social and emotional learning. And because of that, there's been a real concerted effort at the federal level to support state departments in the purveyance of social and emotional learning. So we have 4 federally supported technical assistance centers to help us look at social emotional learning, and I'm really proud of that. So first we have the Region 8 Comprehensive Center, which is an organization supported by West Ed, and Region 8 helps us develop a 5-year plan to have a social and emotional learning community, to look at alignment across all the offices of the Department of Education. So you could imagine that Sean and the work that they're doing would be a really beautiful example of positive redundancy. So Region 8 is helping us look at internally and public facing, is our message getting through, and how might we have a learning community that would help that? And we'll be inviting Mycella into that learning community, as well as other stakeholders including families and children. The other technical assistance center that we're working with is CISLS. It's the Center for, I have a lot of C's and S's in all these technical assistance centers, and so it's kind of, I'm worried that somehow I'm gonna mispronounce it, but CISLS is the Center for the Improvement of Social and Emotional Learning and School Safety, but they're gonna help us strategically communicate what we mean by systemic SEL. I don't know if you've been familiar, but the Aspen Institute and the National Commission on Hope came out with what would district level social emotional learning occur. We want to be really resonant with that, and we want to communicate that. Lauren's already mentioned CASEL, and we are one of the states that CASEL's helping us look at state level implementation and district level implementation to assure that those CASEL 5 skills that Lauren mentioned are implemented with fidelity, and that there's a rubric for being able to say what are the look-fors when you're at the district level or school building level, to be able to assure that SEL is delivered in such a way that it was intended. And then the last technical assistance center is a partnership. Michigan was one of 6 states recently to have won the opportunity to join a learning community to look at SEL, MTSS, and equity. And you could imagine that that's a question for those of you deep in the work would want to know how within an MTSS or tiered delivery system, how does SEL play out, not get diluted, not get distorted, have integrity, and also how could we look at purveying SEL within an MTSS infrastructure to assure that the benefits of that tiered way of working really maximize outcomes. Next slide. We want to make sure that we don't send the message that this is about the children being disconnected from a context. We want to make sure that we're looking at what's our instructional framework. And as much as Lauren is talking about adult SEL, the practices that teachers want to demonstrate have to be in place for there to be congruence. It's what I call it, sort of emotional constancy. Are people walking the talk? It would be ridiculous to be focusing on a particular social emotional skill if the teacher wasn't demonstrating the kind of practices that promote psychological safety. So the dimensions, there's 10 identified features of an instructional environment that's consistent and compatible with SEL. And so they're cooperative learning, classroom discussions, giving children the time to self-assess and self-reflect, balanced instruction, academic press and expectations, competence building. Next slide, Sean. Student-centered discipline, teacher language, responsibility, choice, warmth, and support. And we have a really, really nice document that Lauren and Dr. Nick Yoder created, which was an implementation guide that gives more detail about that instructional framework and how critical that is to the success of delivering social and emotional learning. Next slide, please. And finally, CASEL has come out with what's called the equity elaborations, and a source article that you might really appreciate is something called Transformative Social Emotional Learning by Dr. Rob Jakers. If you could put in the chat, has anybody familiar with that article, Transformative Social Emotional Learning? It's a really powerful document. I can make sure that you get that resource, but it talks about this idea that children, if they're going to learn social emotional learning, there needs to be a thought to how equitable to look at equity and look at the elaborations that support a child's identity, agency, and belonging. I'll give you an example. I felt for a long time that the metacognitive skills that are delivered or not delivered in schools had a lot to do with academic achievement. So when I looked at dropout and graduation promotion, I looked at those what's called non-cognitive, non-academic skills, SEL skills that are there for kids. And when we were working with Suttons Bay High School, we noticed that 85% of the kids are graduating, 15% were not. Of the 15% that were not, they were Hispanic children and children who were Native American. If we go to what had to happen to change in that high school, they got to 100% graduation. This is before the high school content expectations. But they got to 100% because the Native American children were encouraged to get involved in youth leadership, and it became eligible to get a foreign language requirement for them to speak their own language. That sense of agency, that sense of belonging, that sense of that their identity is valued, I think is what contributed to those children then finally completing high school and graduating. So what Dr. Jagers talks about is civic socialization. As a child, do I feel like I have the social and emotional skills to be able to move forward? Does the environment welcome me to do that? And are we looking more deeper about those equity elaborations? I'm going to pass it. There's a bunch of slides of resources. You can, I think, Sean, you've got the PowerPoint. If you could, I think everybody will get that. And so I'm not going to walk you through those, but I want to set us up for Wendy.
Hi, everybody. I guess I'm on here. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for allowing us to share the work we've been doing and across the state. I am, just to start where Lauren began, I'm feeling a little anxious, but I'm incredibly grateful for this time to be with all of you. I am the current department head in teacher education at Eastern Michigan University. And my point of entry with SEL and getting to know the fabulous Lauren Kazee is when I was actually the director of student teaching. And we recognized that there was this moment when our students were given their assignment and placement information and this space between this coursework and when they were going to actually start those placements. And they were feeling all kinds of things. I could get at that bingo board and have them go through probably about every emotion. They'd run it through rapid fire. We realized we needed to create a moment in which we help them to get themselves ready and get into a good mindset for going into the classroom. So we started to develop some professional learning workshops, mindfulness sessions, and self-care events in collaboration with the EMU Bright Futures program, which is an after-school program that has long, I'm sorry, I'm still on first, I'm right here, has long incorporated attention to the wellness and pro-social behaviors of youth and the importance of centering the relationships between adults and youth as the starting point for anything that you're trying to do, but especially in that after-school environment. And there was so much that I was learning from my collaboration with all of my friends as a part of that the EMU Bright Futures after school programs that I was thinking was just being lost and not a regular part of the way that we thought about preparing educators. So that led to thinking very differently about what could be part of our regular program, again, to help students to begin to center themselves before and as they started working with youth in these placements. And then we also began to realize that this work, of course, isn't just about that moment before you go into the classroom. It's happening while you're in working and learning to teach and becoming the educator you aspire to be. And at that moment, we began realizing that we have these deep partnerships and that this work would really be well situated within our early field experiences. Currently, we have 2 of these initiatives underway. They're happening within the same district that's nearby. One is focused on 2 elementary schools, and so there are about 40 of our pre-service students there who are now in their second semester of working with several faculty members. And then the other is in a secondary high school setting. There are 20 students in that cohort. In the first one, in the elementary, we're looking at the relationship between literacy development and science, learning of science, and thinking about science in the context of understanding what does it mean actually to work in an intergenerational space with youth and attending to their social emotional learning and well-being. While we think about their literacy development and the community organizations that are part of this initiative and the services that they bring to support development in writing and overall wellness. At the secondary level, with this blocked set of courses, there are 3 courses. One is focusing on curriculum planning and instruction, and another course that's focused on social foundations and community engagement. And this course's cohort is experiencing a very rich integration approach of place-based education, anti-racist pedagogy, and social emotional learning. So I'm ready for the next slide. So what are we learning about these school university community collaborations? Well, we're finding, of course, that the schools themselves have very unique communities, but there are some commonalities. Each of them began with our faculty spending a great amount of energy and time getting to know the educators and the youth in the setting. They prioritize authentic, mutually beneficial relationships that support self-care of the K-12 youth and the educators in the system. As Lauren pointed out, this work is really about people coming together for the wellness of that school learning community. And it extends far beyond that moment in the school. As many of our students who came into our program have pointed out, school wasn't a great place for them. So trying to imagine themselves as the educators they aspire to be means that they need to attend to and unpack all those experiences that they've had in the past to imagine something different and imagine different kinds of relationships. And our efforts have been about doing that within the context of these deep partnerships. We've also been working on helping our educators to become even increasingly aware of their own competencies in terms of self-directing, forming relationships, taking initiative, managing themselves, and engaging in thoughtful decision-making. And this work, though, is happening in real time in a dynamic environment. It is not about our rolling this out as a course or as a set of lectures or something like that. It's about real-time working with the youth and the educators in that school environment, and our faculty are just phenomenal in the open-hearted and spirit that they bring to this, because it's complicated, it's messy, it's never done. It brings up all kinds of questions while you're trying to figure things out, and it's certainly not like you can create a curriculum and that's what you're going to be doing that semester, because each and every day there are new interesting moments to learn and grow from. We also have been recognizing that there is a whole nother way to think about preparing educators for this kind of work. And our students in these cohorts are really living and learning in these school environments. So they are becoming a part of it. They're moving freely around the building throughout the day. They attend staff meetings, they attend workshops, school events. It's a whole different way to think about the role of the educator. And now more than ever, we're recognizing that anything can happen. And anything can happen Friday, anything can happen Monday, Tuesday, and all through the week. And that's what we're trying to make sure that we are having as part of a regular part of our reflection as these cohorts are completing their field experiences. And for the last slide, I just wanted to say sort of where we are in our learning. And of course, this is an everyday process. But as I said before, it begins and ends with understanding oneself in a relationship to not only oneself, but to and with others and within a context. It is not separate in any way. It is not discrete. It is not, one and done kind of moment. So you can make yourself, figure yourself out, but until you figure out yourself with others, it really doesn't go very far. We've also have recognized that the importance of empathy, compassion, and restorative justice as critical dimensions of the relationship part. So what we've been doing is adding to the CASEL model and recognizing there are so many other parts that are really fundamentally necessary to make these situations or make these relationships go to the distance that we strive to. We also recognize that thinking of this as something that you could enforce through a compliance-driven model, it's an easy thing to do to create these like charts or rubrics or things that you check off or make it part of an evaluation system. And we understand why some are doing it in that way, but we recognize there's so much more value in healing and hopefulness to thinking about it in a very different, more organic, human way. And the question that drives both of these groups that are out there now is just like, what does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to be human right now as we're experiencing this? So I thank you for your time, and I pass the floor back to Lauren.
I think we're out of time. God bless you both. Thank you. That was so great. I am so impressed with the work that Wendy is doing at Eastern, and just want to keep giving her accolades about that. So I think we're at the Q&A. Brian, you have the slides you're managing? Yes. So we're out of time for Q&A, but if you go to the next slide, there's our email addresses. So feel free to contact us. This was a gift. Thank you so much for the amount of time that you gave us. Sorry, we went over a few minutes, but so grateful to have this opportunity. And if you have questions or want to know more or want to join the party, send us an email, and we're happy to invite you with open arms. And I think there's a couple questions maybe. Lisa, I think you can do that, but thank you so much. And I'm turning it back to Lori.
Okay, thank you so much, Wendy, Lisa, and Lauren. Great information. I know I'm very eager to dig in, and I think it's going to help our pre-service teachers become more empathetic and understanding of the whole learner as we support them in this. So thank you for taking this charge and sharing with us today. So we are going to transition next to our core practices focus. And Sean Lancaster, Paula Lancaster, and Karen Ann, thank you for joining us. I'm gonna hand it over to you if you're ready to begin.
Sure. Karen is not here, but Paula and I are. And just in case you're curious, yes, we are married. I wasn't on this morning. I'm Sean Lancaster. I'm representing Mitten, the Michigan Teacher Education Network, where I volunteer. For the past 21 years, I've been a professor in the teacher prep program at Grand Valley State University. So we're going to be focusing on building respectful relationship with students. And this is, I think, the fourth core practice that this group has addressed. And this work should resonate with all of us after that presentation on SEL. But I want to also make it clear that we are not here to talk about this core practice because we think programs aren't taking up the practice. We're well aware that everybody's doing this work. We're here, I guess, in part to surface what programs are doing and to work on ways that we can build a common language for talking about and teaching the practice, and maybe a common understanding for how we can teach it to our candidates, particularly as a tool for addressing equity and justice in the classroom. So anything we share is with those goals in mind. And so you can see the agenda there. We can go to the next slide.
Can I just jump in for a second too? I just wanted to add that, I concur with everything Sean said, and I wanted to make a couple of connections back to what we just heard, which was wonderful. So thank you, Lauren, Lisa, and Wendy for sharing all of that. But specifically, Lauren shared a slide that referenced 2 studies about SEL interventions. And Dr. Joe Durlak has been doing, he's been a leader in this area of work for quite some time. And in those 2 articles, I believe they're both reviews, at least one of them for sure is a review of literature. And he and his team both, they talk about the success of those programs and those interventions. And it's important to note that when you read those articles, a common denominator in the success of the programs is that in every case, at least in the most recent article, the interventions were led by skilled and well-prepared teachers. And so I just wanted to reiterate the point and reinforce just how critical and how powerful skilled teachers are in this area of work, and recognize the important impact that they have. And that's, again, in part why we think it is so important for us to come together as an enterprise around some common approaches to helping our new teachers elevate their work in this area.
All right. So the next slide was actually a link, and I will put in the chat. I'm doing that now. This is a link to, yeah, it went in the chat. This is a link to the decomposition. We'll refer to this often throughout today, and so it's a good idea to have this in front of you. I'm sure everybody's seen it, but if we can just refresh our memories on it, it will help contextualize everything we talk about today. You can go to the next slide. All right, so the uniqueness of this practice is one we want to address, and because this is a practice that's connected to just about everything a teacher does, whether it's how we check in with students or say hello as they enter the classroom, to working on fractions, to the feedback that we give to our students. But as you heard in the last session, Lauren talked about a teacher pointing out a child who hadn't taken medication. And that's certainly not a way we want to build respectful relationship with students. And so, oops, I have a bug. So Paula's going to talk about how this connects with other core practices. You want to go ahead, Paula?
Yeah, so, it is an interesting aspect of building respectful relationships that while it can happen in isolation, and there can be opportunities for building relationships to be planned for and executed in that way, oftentimes it doesn't occur like that. Oftentimes opportunities present itself to build relationships with students, or teachers actually have to search for and look for times and opportunities to do that. So the practice is highly situational and happens in spurts and stops and starts and continues throughout the semester. It's not exactly, or not, all that similar in the approach we have to take to some of the other practices, where we can be more planful about it, and where we might actually be able to more easily identify critical components of specific practices. With regard to building relationships, it's much more individually dependent. So we recognize that this one's a complicated one to teach to candidates for all sorts of reasons. And given the manner in which the practice itself is different, in that it's highly situational, can be done in many, many different ways across time, not necessarily planned for, but sometimes could be planned for. We're wondering what you all think about, or what you have experienced as some challenges that we have with this practice in general, but primarily in supporting our teacher candidates and being able to take it up. So, we're offering the chat, and we do hope that at any point in time throughout our presentation that you would share your ideas and thoughts as well as questions. Please do feel free. But we're also wondering if you've encountered some challenges in helping candidates develop skills around building relationships with students, and maybe even how you've addressed those. So if you can put things in the chat, feel free. And we'll also be watching and looking for what your thoughts are as we move forward. And I think,
next slide.
Yeah, we can go on to the next slide. So this one's back to me, and I want to first and foremost really thank Dr. Martha Kieran-Priest for sharing some research that she completed specifically around building respectful relationships. And what we have in front of us is some excerpts from a study she conducted. I believe it may have been her dissertation work, in which she visited with schools, and she specifically worked with administration and teachers to identify teachers in buildings in which, or teachers in buildings that were known for being able to build relationships with students and felt that they had strength in doing so. But she was also looking specifically at teachers who are teaching across difference. And in this case, multiracial, multi-ethnic urban classrooms, and the teachers in this case were white. So she was asking teachers about, why they feel like they're very good at building relationships, what evidence they have of that. So these are just some thoughts that they were sharing with them. And you can see them in the thought bubbles, that they're responding and talking about their care and interest and love for students and children, kids, and that they, generally have pretty good, solid relationships with students. So here we are in a setting in which the teachers feel very strongly that they have built good relationships with the kids in their classrooms, and their administrators have also identified them as such. So then another part of her research is represented on the next slide, in which she then asks students to talk a little bit more about, oh, I'm sorry, do we need to show the bubbles a little bit? Were they not on the screen? There they are. So this is what the teachers had to say. Now we can go forward and take a look at the next screen. This is what the kids had to say. And I'll let you just read those rather than me read them out loud, although we might need some translating because of the handwriting.
You might have to hit the mouse a couple times to show all three of them.
So we have, what is something your teacher did not notice about you that you wish she had? That I'm capable. What is something you wish your teacher did more to make you feel good, noticed, or respected? Liked me more. So what she found was there was some disconnect in what the teachers thought about themselves as relationship builders, and that their internal or their feelings of care for their students wasn't necessarily translating well to students. Not all students felt terribly cared for in those classrooms. So there was some disconnect and work that needed to be done. So if we could move on to the next slide, just to reiterate the point about this particular practice. This is a challenge for us in teacher preparation and in our field generally, in that we often do take for granted work around building relationships with students. We do tend to take as an assumption that people who go into teaching are somewhat naturally inclined in this direction. And there's really not evidence to support that. We assume that the work of building relationships is easy, that most of our candidates probably already know how to do this. They've maybe spent time with students, and so it should happen. And if you just push the cursor, the forwards button one more time. Instead, what we really know is that this practice is difficult and complex. It takes a careful eye, it takes watching, it takes observing, it takes multiple efforts on the part of the teachers, and that it's especially challenging across difference, across cultural contexts for teachers, and that we really need to dig deeply into it, more so than maybe we currently do or have had the opportunity to do in our own practice. So it is something that we probably need to take apart a little bit. And I think this does fit really well in what we heard in the previous presentation about where the work might start with and where we should think about unpacking our own biases as a starting point. And I'm noticing some challenges that people are putting into the chat box about recognizing that their mentors are either good at it or not, but not being able to name exactly how we can improve or identify those components of the practice. So on to the next slide.
Yeah, we already noted that we know everybody's working on this. I guess I want to have a quick conversation. This can be in the chat, but people can speak up as well, because COVID-19 has really impacted how we implement this practice. And, what does it mean to build a respectful relationship on Seesaw or in Google Classroom or even in Zoom, So go ahead and speak up and talk about what we're doing out there to try and address this practice given the circumstances we're in.
Do we want to put the questions back up? There we go. Thank you. So Mike makes a good point. Mike McDonald makes a good point about the extent to which counselors, for example, spend time really practicing and having these intentional learning experiences specifically around this skill. We tend to jump right into instruction without realizing that many components of instruction or many types of instruction is really hard to pull off if you don't actually have respectful relationships built with your students. Yeah, Kelly points out the issues of privacy concerns and how hard it is. And we've probably all had the experience in our own Zoom meetings of how hard it is to read nonverbal skills in this venue.
Yeah, I talked with a teacher about a month ago, and she has a Google Sheets, it's just like Microsoft Excel, but she has a tab for each student, and she will write down notes of every interaction she has with students. I know that takes more time, but it also helps her to see if she's giving students certain favoritism or not even addressing other students. But it also helps when you go back to check in with the student and say, you know, how's your dog doing? Because you don't have to remember all that. It's in your notes and helps to contextualize your conversations with those kids.
That's such a good point, Jennifer. We need to Maslow before we can Bloom's. That's a good way to think about it. Yep. I love that one. I think we need posters. Well, please feel free to keep adding things in.
Yeah, we can actually go to the next slide. I put another link to the decomposition one more time. It's just a reminder for me to do that. Here's the actual decomposition, the detailed version. And I know you can all read through it and you probably have it in front of you now. I'll just note that there are the big pillars of establishing rapport, building mutual trust, monitoring and maintaining relationship with students, and examining and managing self in relationship to students. And then you can see the details of what's involved, bulleted in each column. But it's not as simple as some of the other decompositions to actually teach and assess. And this one takes a lot of work, and we're gonna do some practice with you as we go through this. For example, go ahead, Paula.
No, you go ahead and then I'll jump in right after. That's fine.
I was just gonna give an example, like there's under, let me find it, under building mutual trust, you'll see that we want candidates to treat students as trustworthy. I don't know that our students know what that means fully. In fact, I think from my experiences, a lot of students or beginning level teachers can easily think that their students are kind of trying to pull a fast one or being mischievous. And so they have to really learn how to see students as trustworthy. And they have to have opportunities to practice. Go ahead, Paula.
Well, I think one of the things that I think Sean wanted me to mention before and I forgot, so I'll take this opportunity now, is that this practice kind of undergirds the other three that we have talked about and that are part of the first 4 core that we're going to be taking on. So if you think about, for example, the practice of leading a group discussion, in order for all children or youth to feel safe in sharing within a discussion, in order for those norms for communication to be established, some sort of rapport will have had to happen within the class and within students. Otherwise, some kids are not going to feel safe sharing their thinking in front of the class. So the beginnings of building respectful relationships have to happen in order for really good, equitable discussions to happen. If you think about making content explicit, when we're directly teaching something or making something explicit, students are more apt to pay attention, listen, take it in, try it out, if they trust that what we're telling them and sharing with them and modeling to them is accurate and true and right and good and worthy of their time and effort. And so again, building trust is part of being able to kind of adequately and effectively make content explicit. And then the first practice that I think we shared at DARTEP is eliciting and interpreting student thinking. And I would say, that one for sure, and I think Sean would agree, requires that rapport has been established, that trust happens, and that we continue to maintain these relationships with students. Otherwise, they are going to be very hesitant to share their initial thinking with us as individuals and certainly in front of the class. So this particular practice will have an effect on how effective the other three will be as we're kind of enacting them in classrooms. I also do want to take a moment, because we probably should have done this at the beginning, to recognize our wonderful colleagues at Teaching Works for getting all of this work started, for creating and sharing all of the materials that they have. We really wouldn't be where we are without their hard work.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide. And actually, I'm going to have you turn to the last page of the decomposition. And if you want to go to the next slide, I'll post these questions in the chat. When you look at this visual, you can see, what does it communicate about the work of the practice? What do you think matters about the practice when you look at the visual? What do you notice?
I like that Amanda. Yep, I like that Amanda led with that, centered on student identity and agency. Yes, has to be the primary focus. Yeah.
Yeah, Angela says it's a cycle. It's very much iterative, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And yes, Amy, examining and managing the self is always important. And we don't think about that very often, probably, when we think about building relationship with others, but we have to have ourself intact as well.
Yeah, Mike used that word bounded, because if we let that go, we're apt to make some errors in these relationships. Mm-hmm. Catherine, seeing the overlap. That's a good point too, Julie. It doesn't matter if we feel good about the relationship. What really matters is what students feel about it. And how do we know and pick up on that? Yeah.
Yeah, and how do we monitor it and record it for ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, you can keep putting stuff in there, but we're going to move on in the interest of time. In the next slide. So this is a close-up of the decomposition with some snippets pulled out. The column headings are on the left as areas of work, and with some of the bullet points as the categories of techniques that we can address when teaching the core practice. And if you view those bullet points, can you begin to see ways to teach our candidates to grow in their knowledge of this practice? So for example, seeking to learn about and connect with each student as a whole person. That seems to tie in really well with what might be taught in a class on diversity, for example, in our programs. But we can also connect it to the messages we're hearing in current events like the Black Lives Matter movement. I could also see where, I'm looking at it now, but I could also see where methods instructors might have more of a role to play in something like support individual students to engage in productive struggle with content and to persevere. How thrilling is it for a student to overcome a struggle? And how do we teach our candidates to encourage and promote that kind of teaching? So as I noted, Paula and I are soon going to do some activities that will hit on all 4 of these areas and across many of these categories and techniques. We'll go to the next slide.
Yep. And we also know that you all are doing some of these similar types of activities too, and we'll hope that you'd be willing to share some of the ideas or approaches that you all use within the chat. Okay, so what we're going to do very soon is take a look at a transcript from a teaching episode. So we're going to just give you, actually, we're going to read through the transcript, and then what we'd like for you to do as you're listening to the transcript or as you read through it yourself is to consider the core areas that you see in the decomposition: establishing rapport, building trust, monitoring and maintaining the relationships, and examining and managing self. And we'd like for you to just think about what evidence of those kind of core areas of work do you see within the transcript? Can you imagine that the teacher was engaging in, and maybe what was missed? And we realize that because we're looking at a transcript and not a video, and we're not seeing the reflections of the teacher, we're not seeing it over time, it's just one brief episode, that we're not going to see everything, and that's okay. But we'd really like for you to see what you notice, and then share that in the chat, both what's there, what's not there. And well, let's just take it from there. So we'll go to the next slide, and Sean and I are going to play the roles of the teacher and student. And
we're going to bring it to life.
Yep, we're going to try to bring it to life. And we'd like you to just keep in mind that decomposition, and throw in the chat what you're seeing and hearing as we go through the transcript. So keep in mind that the teacher, just as a little introduction, it's fairly early on in the teacher and students, the classrooms, their time together. So early on in the year, they know each other okay, but not as well as, you know, halfway through the semester. And the teacher has asked for feedback from the students. So she's taking down some ideas on what the teacher can do better in the classroom. I think we have time for a couple more ideas. Remember, the question is, what does a good teacher do that helps you to do really well and supports you to learn a lot? Lorraine?
Yeah, I think when you call on people, I think you always look on that side more than you do on the sides over there and over there.
So you want me to be more careful, to be looking all around the room when I call on someone?
Yeah, because it seems like every time you call on someone, you're either calling on like someone over there.
So where do you think I'm not looking enough, Lorraine?
Over there and over there.
Okay, so be sure, see, how could we put that, Lorraine? Be sure to look all around the room to call on kids?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really helpful one, I think. Okay, so now we've wrapped up that part, and we're going just back into general instruction. So here we go, teachers teaching. Okay, are you ready to see the picture? Remember, I don't want anyone to say the answer out loud, and I don't want anyone to confer. What I want to know is, what do you think when you see this? So all we're going to do is read the problem together and make sure you can read it. Who could read the first question? Don't say you're thinking about it, just read it. Okay, I'm going to try to do what Lorraine suggested. I'm going to try to look around the room more. So, okay, Dior, I'm calling on you. Could you read that first question up there, please? Lorraine, that was a super helpful comment you made for the teacher contract about looking all around the room.
Oh, okay.
That was really helpful. Okay, so that's the transcript. And what we'd like for you to do, if you could go back to that previous slide.
No, you can go to the next slide.
Oh, you can go to the next one? Is it on that one too? Okay.
I think.
Oh yeah, that's fine, yep. So we're wondering, like, what did you see in the practice from that transcript and what was missing? And then we can also talk about, or think about maybe the use of a transcript as a potential practice activity for building skillfulness within our candidates. So Deborah commented about the valuing student input. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just trying to be authentic about taking a student's idea and using it in the classroom. So it could serve as an example for trustworthiness. Yep. Yeah, noticing that circling back, I wondered both how Lorraine must have felt, which, you know, I would hope would be honored, but also as other students saw and noticed the teacher taking seriously the feedback. And you can also feel free to share things that you think you didn't see or we couldn't see, in part just because it's a transcript.
Or even what our candidates might not notice that maybe we notice.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point too. What do you think candidates would have noticed or not noticed? Yeah, that's true, Amanda. Yep, I think Mike's a good point too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Kelly, even our reenactment didn't get at your point.
Right. I was just going to comment on Kelly's point too. Yes. You know, within our classrooms, that's where we dig into those, you know, what was Lorraine really getting at? And we can't tell that because we can't see the room. Video would have brought the transcript to life a little bit more and maybe helped us notice other things.
Yeah, I think we should, in the interest of time, I think we need to move on.
Yep.
So laying the groundwork. Actually, you can go to the next slide.
So to enact the practice of building respectful relationships, you know, there are some things that our candidates really need to be able to do, need to experience in some way, or need to think about in some way. So we have in kind of chunks of work here, learning about children and some various ways that they can learn about children. And again, we know that you all have some wonderful ideas and experiences and things that you're doing within your programs that we could share and add to how our candidates might be able to learn about children. The same thing with learning about families and schools and communities. And then there's also learning about the self. And this is a link, right, Sean?
Yes.
Maybe or maybe
can't
not.
Remember. Oh yeah, it still is.
Okay, so there's a tool that we've both used in our own practice in interrogating the self, kind of an internal survey or inventory, if you will, where teacher candidates or even us as teacher educators can use it to really help us dig deeply into our past experiences as students on the other side of the desk, and also as children, but also our experiences within our worlds, within our family environments and our communities, and how those histories and experiences help form and shape our expectations for the students that we now work with. So integrating these types of activities into our preparation programs so that students have a chance to both learn about themselves deeply and understand how who they are as people impacts the children that they're working with, but then also extending that knowledge to others and how you might come to learn genuinely and authentically about children and about schools and families. So we're going to go on to the next slide and do an example activity, just small conversations with children that we can use as a tool to help candidates begin to build their skillfulness around respectful relationships, but then also to reflect on themselves as teachers and as educators, you know, trying this practice out. So we have just small conversations as a potential practice or enactment. And our quick tips that we would give to people who are trying this out is that converse as yourself. So don't play the role as a child, but converse as yourself and who you are, and to keep the conversations relatively small. And so I think another click.
So now we could potentially push you out into breakout rooms. We're not going to do that. But if you think about the instructions Paula just gave, would you have enough information to do this activity at this point?
And we often wonder if this is what we ask students to do, and sometimes we do. Sometimes we send them into buildings or classrooms and we ask them to, have a conversation with kids, get to know students, or we ask them to work in small groups, but we don't really sometimes give them the depth of guidance that we should so that they can build up this particular practice. So to go a little bit deeper on the next slide, we might really spend some time digging into what do we mean by small conversations as a vehicle to build respectful relationships. And so we could talk about why we would even do this. Like, what's the purpose of small conversations? It's not just to make students feel good, although in all likelihood it will, but it's also to truly get to know them and what they're thinking about, to personalize school in some way so that they feel like somebody's noticing me, someone cares about me in this building, to build that connection and trust, to demonstrate that you actually care about the students that you're working with. Small conversations can help to do this. And we all know this, so I'm not speaking to you as if I'm teaching you. I'm talking more about how I might share this with beginner teachers or novices. And to click again. And to keep in mind that they can occur throughout the day, that they don't have to be content specific. They can be, but maybe initially as we're getting to know students, we'd want our candidates to have more content neutral kinds of conversations. And then we can go to the next slide. But we can also break it down even more for our teacher candidates and help them to think about what's a good way to launch a small conversation with students. I had the occasion of watching a number of our students, teacher candidates, before the semester before they were about to student teach. And we were doing some simulations around just getting to know students. And I think I watched about a dozen teacher candidates go through this exercise using the immersion software. And I was surprised in some ways because some students were amazing. They jumped right in and were able to make the connections with students, and others really struggled. And I think that something like what you see on this slide, where we can break it down for students a little bit and talk about what actually happens in a launch. What do you need to think about before you just decide to talk to a child? How can you be really careful about making sure that you're taking turns and that you're not filling in, or you're not steering the conversation, but that you're really, really listening. And that at the end, you end the conversation in a way that implies that this was great, let's revisit it one more time. So here are some possibilities for how we can actually break this practice down a little bit more for students.
Yeah, and this helps to also illustrate the complexity of this single activity that's addressing a larger core practice. That it's broken down into 3 different segments. It's almost like when we look back at leading a group discussion and how it was broke down to those 3 different segments. We have that even in a small conversation.
Okay. So on the next slide, we'd like for you all to try this out and just see what it would feel like from a candidate's perspective also. But take turns initiating and engaging in small conversations with one another.
Yeah, try not to be more than a minute or 2 and let each person in the group talk. Make sure you are yourself. It's hard enough to be ourselves rather than trying to play someone else.
Yep. Think about launching the conversation. Think about making it a 2-way and listening, and then think about how you end it. And we're going to, I think you're all going to be randomly placed into breakout rooms. So you'll probably have to do a quick introduction.
And we'll see you back here soon.
And we'll see you soon. Yep. Maybe that will give us even a little bit more time to think about and talk about how we are already addressing this practice within programs and courses and experiences, and other ideas that we might have too. So, Sean, you want to go to the next slide? I think it's you.
Yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide. And then the next one again. Yeah. So this is back again to an abbreviated version of the decomposition, but you'll notice that we now have taken the small conversation activity and plugged it in, and you can see how it addresses all 4 areas of work, the multiple connections to the categories of techniques on the right. I'll let you read through that, but this is just one single activity that could really cover a lot of bases. And I know our candidates need a lot more than this, but that's, you know, that's still substantive work that we're able to do with just that single activity. We can.
And so next slide.
Yeah, see if you can click so that we go all the way. There we go. Yeah. Let me make sure I'm on the right slide. Yeah, so this is the cycle of how the core practice can be taught and learned. You can see that a bunch of teaching strategies and methods that are integrated across the learning cycle. Paula and I earlier used transcripts in our introduction, and that fits in the introduction cycle. And you can see transcripts also used to prepare, and even in the analysis cycle. We did small conversations, and that's also a form of enactment. But there's a lot more that can be done just on this potential practice across many classrooms and scenarios, and then on into student teaching.
And we are firm believers in doing the peer run-throughs of the small conversations prior to working with students. In fact, I'd say we're pretty strong believers in peer run-throughs of just about every practice before in front of students. So at this point, I think, are we ready to open it up to questions? The next slide.
Yeah.
And we know, again, questions, comments about the practice itself. I know there were some questions earlier or in another one of the breakout groups about Mitten generally, and we're happy to talk more about what our plans are for Mitten. We're only 2 representatives of that group, so we probably won't be able to answer every question that comes along. But feel free to add into the chat ways in which your programs are addressing building respectful relationships at this point, and also questions that you have. Or you can also unmute and ask a question.
You've been a tremendous audience.
Maybe you could comment on Jillian's question in the chat.
I wonder if the skill set for launching a conversation are different with being on a computer via face-to-face. Oh, it does make it more complicated for sure. Sean, I know you're addressing a little bit of that in the ed tech course you're teaching. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, you can't, when you have a large, like we're doing right now, it's impossible for the teacher to have those little side conversations that happen in a real classroom. You just can't do it. And what we've been encouraging is for the teacher to set up, you know, a half hour at some point during the day for people to drop in, and maybe even schedule individual students with a 5-minute or a 10-minute segment that's just between the teacher and that student, because otherwise the teacher is missing out on those individual kind of real meaningful moments.
Yeah, and I think again, the lack of, or the challenge in reading the nonverbal cues also makes it even that much more difficult. So really important to check in verbally.
Yeah, and we can give feedback to students where we give them little notes, you know, when they get even younger, maybe that's something like a Flipgrid type video feedback so that your personality can shine through in what you're saying to your students.
So we shared an URL earlier about Mitten, and we do want to, I just want to provide a little bit more information. Some of the things that we are planning for the upcoming year are opportunities for us to have these networked communities, or maybe you could think of them as learning communities, where we come together and unpack these practices a little bit more, but also share with each other what we are trying. We've already had the experience very recently of a faculty member, he videoed in his class this semester some work he was doing around, I think it was it making content explicit, Sean? But a group of us.
Norms and routines.
Oh, norms and routines, that's right. And a group of us, you know, watched the video under his guidance and shared feedback and thoughts, and really were able to get deeply into the equity type issues around the instruction that we were seeing. So our hope is to be able to share ideas, but also sharing ideas via, here's something, you know, like putting our work out there for each other to learn from and to improve our own practices over time. So we would have some of these learning communities that would most likely meet monthly for a period of time and address a particular practice or a particular pedagogy together. And we are also committed to inviting our K-12 partners into that mix. So that's along the lines of what we are thinking about for the upcoming years, that there would be a few of these types of communities that would come together.
Yeah, even the methods instructor who brought his problem of practice for us to talk about, he gained from the discussion we had, but as a participant, I gained as much as anybody else in thinking about the issue and stuff that I hadn't even thought about. And I also learned new ideas from the problem he brought forth and how he teaches. So it's valuable to everybody who participates, whether you bring the practice or not.
One question I received during a breakout session earlier, Paula and Sean, concerning Mitten was about membership. I explained to the person who asked the question, there was a sort of a grandparenting in of some folks who had been involved with the Michigan Program Network, which was somewhat of a forerunner to this, right, although slightly different. But the deadline, to the regret of this person who asked the question, was yesterday or today or something like that. Could you talk a little bit about membership, inclusion, how one might join?
Sure, and we can certainly extend that deadline if there is interest, for sure. I think that the reason we're even thinking about membership as something important is that what we have found over time is that commitment to the work is really important. And so membership is more about I'm committed and I want to be engaged in these learning community learning circles or network circles or whatever, whatever we're going to name those as. That's what we're really interested in, is getting a feel for how many people really want to engage in this work and would, come to the table time and time again. Because just like we're talking about in classrooms, we're building respectful relationships. Putting your work out there in professionally for people to view and kind of critique and give feedback on also requires building relationships. So that commitment becomes really critical to, to us improving and moving forward as a field. So that's why we even focused on kind of membership as a thing, but we can certainly extend that membership and reopen it, get some emails out to folks if that would be helpful.
Very good. Thank you. Sean and Paula, thank you so much for spending time with us and for breaking down this practice and giving us some really, really good suggestions. It was a great session. So
thank you. It's our absolute pleasure. Thrilled to be here.
Thank you again. So we are going to take 5 minutes, a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, we will have a debriefing session with MDE, and my hope is that we can revisit some of the questions that were asked earlier that we didn't get to. So why don't we shoot for 1:58, just a couple minutes before 2 o'clock. and I will see you then. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are gonna take this time to go over some questions with MDE. And I need to go back and find where we left off. Sean or Gina, anyone from MDE want to jump in? Else I can begin with our first question.
I'm not sure where we left off in them. We got through quite a few of the questions, so yeah.
Okay, all right. I will then start where we left off. And Amy asked, do these subtests also apply to specials areas? So I imagine she means the MTTCs. And we have a lot of this already embedded in the curriculum. Maybe I'm not understanding that.
I think she was talking about the professional standards
Ah.
and whether the professional subtest would apply. And again, for like art or any of the K-12, there wouldn't be a particular subtest until we had a K-12 set. So, I mean, we'll have the 59712 professional subtest, but we won't have one for PK-12 for some time until we get that piece pulled together.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you. Let's see here.
I did not, I was going to put together a slide of like, here are the frontiers of, you know, we're working, here are the defined timelines, then here's like the sketchy timeline for you know, science and social studies, like best case scenario. And then here's the frontier of that. And that answers some of the, so on that frontier is PK-12 professional. So getting that set to accompany the, any of our PK-12 or K-12 endorsement fields. Our advice has been in email to people, work with the 59712 professional right now because they're more detailed, and they and kind of extend downward where, you know, where appropriate. But we do want to bring people together to do that. The other second one is secondary literacy, so the content area reading. Which we updated sort of all the good things, but not that yet. And so we wanted to bring people together. It was a tail end discussion with the ELA standards writers to update it. And, and there were like 3 ideas. And when asked to give feedback on those 3 ideas, there were equal numbers of people on all 3 ideas. So it wasn't like, well, we need to be more intentional about this and bring in some other people. And then Dawn Milner just posted the question about updates on reading specialist standards. So our big vision was we could finally start reading specialist after we had the PK-12 literacy, and alongside that, a math specialist because we have PK-12 math. That's been on the MDE wish list for some time. And so, yes, those are in that, those would be next, getting into those PK-12s, those specialist credentials. We will need to have, we need to build some capacity. So right now you see our team, and we've got 1 open consultant position that we need to fill. And we're looking at some of our contracted work. So those of you who've worked with Sung T on the school social worker and special ed admin standards, we're looking at a similar contract, not for him, because that was for that, but contracting some of that work, because it looks like we have a little bit more flexibility within the hiring freeze that the state has to be able to pull contracted work. If we can get contracted work, we can put all of those other sets of standards like that PK-12 professional, the secondary literacy, and then our PK-12 specialist, and that work can get done quickly. So it's a stay tuned on that. And then the next question was, when do you think the other K-12 standards will be revised? We've got to get through science and social studies, 59712, and then we can get into the other fields.
Except for special education,
Except for special
we
ed,
don't
yeah.
really have that. That's not on the horizon right now, because those rules are under OSE, Office of Special Ed. We don't actually own those rule sets, so we're not able to reconvene those at this time.
Well, it certainly sounds like a lot of work, and appreciate you providing kind of a broader context for understanding where we're at and where you guys are going with the standards. So thank you for that. Susan English asked, K-8 all subjects is only for self-contained classrooms, correct?
Yes, right. It's K-5 all subjects in any way you want, and it's K-8 self-contained. So the current elementary, so that grades 6 through 8, they can teach anything if it's a self-contained classroom, and that's defined as 50% or more of the instruction delivered in a single classroom.
Okay. So at this point, I'm now going to the bottom to see if we have added questions, but this would be a good time. We can open it up to questions. Feel free to unmute and ask any questions. And we have about 10 minutes, but that should give us time for a couple of questions. We have another question from Amy. Thank you for posting this. It says, will assessments be developed to measure the core teaching practices, or does MDE have guidance or a preference on what might be acceptable for MDE reporting on the new programs?
That's excellent. So we have taken the position that we're not going to weaponize the core teaching practices. That was a commitment that we made in adopting them, which means we're not doing a core teaching practices test and making that, that's going to be your thing. There are elements of core teaching practices that are woven into the standards. So there's some contextualization of them that can appear on MTTC, but the primary purpose of that is not measuring core teaching practices, qua core teaching practices, but rather the disciplinary preparation and enactment. We see these as best assessed in performance-based kinds of situations, which would not lend themselves at all to a paper and pencil test. And so working within, say, your student teaching observational instruments, we're hoping to get some leverage with MEA on and other organizations on seeing where the evaluation instrument and observational instruments being used in K-12 have overlap and connections to core teaching practices, so that we can have this common vocabulary across the field, both in service and pre-service. One piece that came out of the EPI performance score work group was to create a common student teaching instrument that we would implement across the state, and that would be a space where I think CTPs could be reasonably assessed. I'd be cautious to then say, oh, and that data will be a high stakes piece of data that impacts your programs. We had put some questions about core teaching practices into the year-end surveys, and so you saw the surveys that were used this year. And what do you know? It topped out, like people's efficacy and people's sense of how teacher candidates were doing in them. It was like way high, no variation, 99%, that they do this all the time. And our takeaway from that was, I don't think the nuances of what it means to build respectful relationships were captured in there. And we had a good conversation about this with the survey development group earlier this week, and we're not going to keep asking that question in that way as part of the survey, because an institution that has been deeply engaged with this, where it's the lingo of the students that are coming through there, you would actually expect them to come out more poorly in the survey than an institution that hasn't been, because the plain language of it. Like, sure, oh, I can build successful relations. I can present content. That's easy. Yep, I'm confident about that. But then a student or a supervisor who knows all the nuances would be like, yeah, I think I do it to a moderate extent, but there's still things to grow. So the survey tool won't be the greatest place at this point in the evolution of it for measurement of core teaching practices. So really looking to kind of local assessments, performance assessments, and formative assessments. So you look at those, the decompositions, being able to build formative assessments that kind of within courses, within programs that dig into those nuances.
Something else to keep in mind too, in addition to that, is that we know every institution is in a different stage of development in learning and understanding core practices and how to implement them and how to engage candidates with them. And so we've taken that part of the program review and put it into an internal team review. So it will be our internal team that really looks at how those core practices are being implemented throughout the program. And then we'll just give feedback and kind of give you a developmental place of, well, it looks like you're, kind of moderately really thinking about this, or it looks like you're just really starting to dig into it. It's not going to be a judgment call. It's very much in the frame of support and feedback.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Especially with the support, rather than being not necessarily punitive, but, judged.
Right.
Well, I think I'm gonna close our meeting for today. And thank you to everyone that participated in spending the day with us. And thank you again to those of you who presented. MDE, thank you always for the time that you put in to not only spend with us, but to prepare and support our group. And yeah, we really appreciate that. And I will be in touch with DARTEP for our upcoming meeting, and that is December 4th. Again, that will be virtual, but I would also like to get some feedback and determine what things can we do to maybe make this go better, any changes that people would suggest, what can we do the same that worked. So I may be reaching out to people about that as well. So with that, our meeting is adjourned, and thank you again for participating. Bye.
Thank you, Lori.
Great. Thank you.
And Mike.
Thank you, Lori.
You.
Mike.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep.